I didn't get that.
Well, you're much younger. I have nothing to hide, and anything that I know about, I want to share. And anything that I've done, I'm reasonably proud of it.
Good. Here. Today is October 16th, 1986. This is Joe Todd and William Welge, an interview with Mr. William Forest McIntire in Oklahoma City.
Correct.
Sir, where were you born?
I was actually born in Chicago, Illinois, on June the 4th, 1912.
1912.
And at an early age, my mother came to Oklahoma.
Okay, who was your mother? What was her name?
My mother was a Hodgson, Hetty Hodgson McIntire.
How do you spell the maiden name?
Hodgson, H-O-T-C-H-K-I-N. A lot of people say S, but just Hodgson. And she came to Oklahoma, at Stigler, Oklahoma, as a school teacher.
Was she married at the time?
No, yes, she was married, but later on my mother and father were divorced. But she came to Oklahoma and had 4 children. And a young school teacher. And by the way, her mother lived with us most of the time, Mary Simple Hodgson. Of course, I was really young then, but I can remember my grandmother real well.
Hey, what was your father's name?
Charles Curtis McIntire. He was a graduate of Princeton University with a master's degree in 1903.
Were your parents from Chicago?
No, just my father.
Your father?
He came originally from Lima, Ohio.
Lima, Ohio.
And my mother was born in Indian Territory at Caddo, Oklahoma.
So she just returned to Oklahoma?
That's right.
Okay. Was your father in Chicago during the Great Fire?
I couldn't answer that. I don't know anything about that.
How long did you live in Chicago?
I only lived there a year or so. I was born there, and they moved me as a young baby child.
Okay. So you were raised around in the Stigler area?
Stigler area.
Okay.
I went to kindergarten in Stigler.
How large was Stigler? What's your first memories of the town?
Well, Stigler didn't have any paved streets, but they did have paved sidewalks downtown, and it was about one street went north and south, and the other east and west, and that's about it, the main streets.
What was the population, any idea?
Oh, I'd say it's around 1,000.
1,000?
That might be too much in those days.
And do you remember the name of the school where your mother was teaching?
She was the Boone School, and later was principal of Boone School.
Boone?
Yes, so that was one of the brick schools. And my mother had a degree from Park College, Missouri, and had a degree from Oklahoma University. In later years, went back to Oklahoma University to get her master's. And my uncle Ebenezer Hodgson was her brother. And he had still lived at Durham in those days. And he got acquainted with Dr. Henry G. Bennett, who came to Southeastern State Teachers College as normal school in those days as president. And my uncle Eb said his sister was qualified and so forth, and Dr. Bennett brought her to Durham to teach. And later in the college there, she became a librarian. And later she was Dean of Women at Southeastern State College now. And I have a brother who's a famous brother, Reverend Carl McIntire. He's a preacher, a radio preacher in the East in Collingwood, New Jersey. Very prominent and very controversial, very conservative. And I have a brother, Blair, who's a teacher. He's a retired teacher, lives in Palm Springs, and he's in ill health. I have a sister living in Dallas, the wife of a gentleman who was supervisor for a telephone company in Dallas.
So how many brothers and sisters?
I have, there are 4 of us. I have 2 brothers and 1 sister. I'm the youngest. Then I had a lady who lived with us in the area, Ebenezer, my mother's sister. Her name was Lucy Kingsbury Forest. She was, the Hodgkins are mixed up with the Kingsburys way back there, Cyrus H. Kingsbury, and the old first Ebenezer Hodgkins that came on the Trail of Tears.
Right.
You're familiar with him. And that Lucy Forest is really one I'm named after, and she named me Forest after her.
So her name was Forest?
Yes, her married name was Forest, and she was later a matron at first at Goodland Orphanage years ago, and then at Oklahoma Pepin College at Durant.
Let me back up just a minute. And have you heard any stories about the removal of the Trail of Tears?
Yes, however, I read not firsthand, they were all secondhand because it was so late. But Uncle Eb talked about living down at Living Land. And then, as you know, Mathena Thatcher came with Ebenezer Hodgkin, her husband, and you know the issue from the children from that couple, which is part of your historical Indian missionaries. I know more particular, of course, firsthand from Mary Semple Hodgkin. She came, as you know, in 1857. There's been some controversy with how she got here, but her story was that she lived in Steubenville, Ohio, from a wealthy family in those days. They wore hook skirts. She rode in a wagon. She went down the Ohio, how the tributary is, or Mississippi, and came up to Arkansas. And she got over to Arkansas, she had to come overland in a covered wagon.
What type of boat did she?
I beg pardon?
What type of boat did she come down the
I just don't know about that. But she was a young girl at Wheelock. And she taught school in the famous Wheelock Stone Church. I think you have a copy of her diary. I gave it to her, I think, Bill, years ago. But I've heard her tell about how she taught the school, and she even remembered telling how the Indians would come and circle the old stone church like they did at the covered wagon days, and they'd scare them, and then grandmother had the kids all start singing. They'd sing hymns and songs and keep singing until they left. That's what she did. And then
what period was it? What?
Well, this was, she came in 57. I'd say this was in the early 60s.
Bill, do you have any
Well,
about this?
how did their missionary work, how was it affected by the Civil War?
That's a good question. I just can't give enough on that.
Well, did they leave? Did they have to leave the territory?
No, I do not think so. I think they stayed in the Indian Territory, and I think they stayed in the general area of Fort Townsend and Wheelock, and what is now the old Goodland area too, because they had a ferry across the Red River in those days, go back and forth. And Mathena Thatcher's little, not diary, but information I give you have relates to across the river from Living Land. And if you've been to the sites, you can see where the Red River and the Boggy River converge. But another thing she told about, she was a strong disciplinarian. And one of the children in her school was a son of Kingsbury, I think it was, or Mr. I think that was he. And he was a troublemaker. And so she got in there and she said, and he was a bully of the class. This is her story. And finally she put a line on the floor. Now anybody that crosses that will be disciplined. And this big bully, of course, the first one to do it. And she says she took him and thrashed him and whooped him. She used the term "turn to time," whatever it is. And she said, I didn't think much about it until that night. His mother said, I noticed the boy's name had these whelps on him. And she gave him back. She couldn't understand where it came from. And his mom and grandmother was whipping him. She said, I never had more trouble with him. Never had another one trouble. She was always that way. I'm jumping around you. Do you mind that? When I was a little boy in Stickler, I was just a kid. And I remember down on one Saturday they took me to town. We only lived about 3 blocks from town. And I was a little kid, and I, you know how the little children do, get out on the floor and kick. I got out on the cement there and made a scene kicking and squalling. And they told my grandmother about it. My mother did or something. And anyhow, she's smart, she was. I bet. She said, okay, you disgraced us, you shamed all of us, and I'm going to whip you. But I'm not going to whip you till 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Well, I had all that time and all night and worked, and I pleaded with everybody to help me. And nobody helped me, and she whipped me at 2 o'clock the next day. Now, I can remember that after 68 years. I'm 74. Now, that's just the way she was. Boy, she meant business. I guess we got some of that in us now. But those are things no one ever knows.
I'd like to ask a question. When Reverend Hodgkins came from Alabama?
Mississippi.
Mississippi.
Yes, sir.
What part of Mississippi did he live?
I really don't have that background on all that, but that's where, obviously, where he married.
Did you know him?
Not that old one. That's too far back for me.
Yeah.
See, that's my great-grandfather.
Yeah.
Too far back.
Yeah.
I'm just lucky to have known Mary Simple Hodgkin. I never knew her husband. He was a Henry Hodgkin. He died early. He owned a sawmill down in what is now the Boswell area, the Boggy Depot area. Had cattle, and for those in that day was reasonably well off. And my grandmother had 9 children, plus adopted Indian children, several Indian children she raised. And my mother was named Hetty, and the Indians called her East Iope. That's Choctaw for last one. In other words, she ought to be the last one. That's when they lived in Caddo. Great big home in Caddo. They had a big double 2-story home in Caddo.
Now, you said your mother was born in Caddo.
Yes, sir.
What year was that? Do you know?
1879. 79, January the 29th. And my grandmother was taught those Indians, and she was very, she never gave an inch, but she was gentle underneath it. And there are all kinds of stories in these articles that you have about how she gave these testaments away. Her little money, whatever money she got, she gave 1/10 of it to the Lord by buying testaments or giving it to the church, and she wrote the testaments. She'd give it to the milk boy, the grocery boy, anybody she'd see, she'd give a testament. That was just for her whole life. I wish I had some of that stuff marked off on me. But you know about that.
And she taught the Indians?
Missionary to the Indians.
Where did she teach?
She taught at Wheelock.
I mean, in the Caddo area.
She taught, I wish I had the diary. She taught the old Bennington school out of, I don't know where Bennington is. She taught at Fort Townsend. They lived at Winniewood later up on this side. Called a place, where is Shikaiki? I don't know where that is. But she had them all listed in Durant. She was there in Durant when they first started the Oklahoma Presbyterian College.
Why did the family move to Chicago?
Well, my mother met my husband as a student at Park College in Parkville, Missouri. That's where they met.
That's where they met.
That's when. Later, my brother went to Park College, and my sister Helen went to Park College. Mm-hmm. And that was a Presbyterian school. It wasn't a seminary per se, but a lot of those people went on. My father was a minister way back then, and he was in Ypsilanti, Michigan. But that's where they came from. And Eddie, in those days, they didn't have any money, and that was one of these part-time. I mean, you had to work part-time to go to school. You worked for your board and room, just like kids do now in some of these institutions. But Uncle Ab always said about how much his mother had done, but he said, well, he said, we sent these kids to school at Park College, but my mother forgets it. I did what farming we did and helped her get the money to send them. He also said, I can't be sure whether it was the Katy Railroad or the road to Rock Island. When run north and south here, Katy, and do it. That he was in the field when these men started walking through the survey to put the railroad in, coming through his cornfield. He turned that far back.
What railroad was it?
I think it would have to be the Katy.
Katy.
From there at Caddo to Denison, that's a famous old line. And then Eb told me about how he went overland from Wynnewood in a wagon. Took my mother Hetty as a girl. Just rode across country. Didn't have any roads, just went across country.
How did people know where they were going?
I don't know
that time?
on that, but they must have it. My mother said at night she'd sleep on the wagon, he'd sleep on the ground. He kept a fire going and have to get up in the night to keep the hogs away. They had hogs. It was nearly wild, I guess. Likewise, he said on Sunday there in Wynnewood, they had on that the deer, this is fantastic, of course. He said the deer sensed when Sunday came around, they'd come up to the yard and graze, but the other days, well, they wouldn't just stay away because we could shoot them then, but Mother wouldn't let her hunt on Sunday. And then he said he used to hunt some on Saturday night, shoot turkeys, you know, him like. And he wanted to be sure when he got home, his mother wanted to know whether he killed that turkey before midnight or not. That's those are just stories how they live. Anyhow, you asked me some of these questions.
I'd like to get some background information on the Goodland Indian School.
Sir, I'll tell you something. I brought a book here which I'm going to give you. I can remember my Aunt Lucy. This is first-class testimony. I can remember when I was about 10 or 12 years old. My Aunt Lucy was a matron there, as I said. She was under Bailey Springs. She knew Silas Bacon. She was a close friend to Mrs. Gibbons. I met Mrs. Gibbons. And later, of course, the Fireballs came. I knew Mr. Fireball and Miss Fireball. I know her son, Robert Fireball, was a banker in Stillwater. But as I told Bill the other day, I was a kid. I was a little city boy and went over there, and the cattle ran wild all over the ground. Had these old yellow bitter weeds. I was scared of them for a while. I found out they wouldn't hurt me. And but she'd take me over there, and I'd spend a couple of months in the summer with her. But the old church there is still there, and likewise the cemetery obviously is still there. But that old church is where Uncle Eb used to preach nearly every Sunday for a while.
When was Goodland founded?
Pause a minute. Gotta find that book I brought you. Oh, here it is. Excuse me. This is called, have you seen this book, The Goodland Indian Orphanage?
I've seen a copy, yes.
Well, I'm going to give you an extra one. This was to Mrs. Hetty McIntire with love from Sammy Hope. That gives it all. And I'd like also, I'll get too much junk here. Oops, that's all right. Well, anyhow, it's supposed to be the real first. I'm not sure which is correct, whether the old stone church at Wheelock's first or whether the Goodland School was first. And that's some of you historians to determine on that. But it served a lot of purpose, and I'd say it did a lot of good for the Indian people.
And also, you said that your Aunt Lucy was a matron.
Yeah, by that matron, I mean the dormitory matron, you know that.
What were her duties?
Well, supervise the boys and the girls in dormitory. They didn't live together like they do now. They had separate dormitory for boys and separate for girls. And she supervised that, and I think she also helped supervise the mess hall, the dining room.
I'd like to ask, what chores did the students have to do at Goodland?
Well, I'm sure they had to do all the maintenance, whatever maintenance is, clean up.
Now, did they raise all their own food?
I think they did, and I think they can do. And because they didn't have any money, everybody in those days had to have a garden. School had it.
What was your Aunt Lucy's last name?
As I say, she was a Hodgkin.
Hodgkins.
But her married name, of course, was Forest, what I mentioned, yes, sir.
What kind of person was she? Just
Miss Forest?
yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Oh, no, she was kind, and she taught Bible. She didn't have the education that you have today. I'm not sure whether she got her degree or not, but she went to college partly. But she was a Bible student and knew that, and she taught Bible wherever she went. And she was a small woman, black-headed. I didn't see her. In fact, I have a picture here. We'll give it as matronly. I'll give you. And she never had any children. She married this Mr. Forrest over that he was Indian. And lived at Tomahawk over on Arkansas. In fact, she had 80 acres of land left that was later given to me. She gave me, wasn't know it was something. I sold it several years ago for the minerals. But Mr. Forrest was Indian and older than she, and had this. He had these allotments, and that's where she never married again. But she was a pretty smart businesswoman, and she took care of. After he left, this is all second hand to me. While she ran these farms and made a living. But my poor soul was very wonderful, and she died in of Parkinson's disease. And Durant and the King's Daughters Rest Home that my mother established, and she died in, I'd say, 1957. My mother died in 55. But we looked after her. And in fact, I gave some money for her support.
How long was she matron at Goodland?
Oh, I'd say 10 years.
10 years.
Likewise at Oklahoma Pepin College. The girls all loved her at OPC. I have an album of her pictures and letters and the rest.
Where is OPC?
Oklahoma Pepin College at Durant.
At Durant.
And by the way, in that connection, the old Southern Presbyterian Church gave a $50,000 endowment chair in honor of Mary Semple Hodgkin. And that endowment, those funds were to be used for teaching the Bible and students. And of course, the OPC is closed, been closed several years. And then the students that did come later on, they got credit for going to Southeastern State College, just a mile from school.
What kind of personality did your Aunt Lucy have?
Very open and friendly, but she's another disciplinarian. Those girls mind her. They call her Aunt Lucy too, which is cute.
What's your favorite memory of her, of your Aunt Lucy?
Well, of course.
If that's a fair question.
Well, sure. Years ago, I have another cousin of Lucy who's a Kingsbury, which you have a picture of down there. She lived in our home too, and she had a little money. She sent me off to military school. I told you that. Off to Danville, Virginia. And I was just in my teens. I'm not sure how old I wasn't. I was about 13, 14, whatever that. And I told Bill, I'm ashamed to tell it to him. Anyhow, my Aunt Lucy took me on the train from Durant and took me to McAllister. That's the first time I had to change trains. And I actually had a tag on with my name on it. And a long ticket as long as you know what. And the towns on it, well, I had McAllister, and had Memphis, had Birmingham, had Atlanta, and then Danville, Virginia. Well, I thought I had to get off at all those places. Well, I made it all right to Memphis, but at the Birmingham or Atlanta, I'm not sure. I got off when I was supposed to. The train went off there I was. And by the way, I had a Pullman. I had a first class ticket. Got off and I was scared, and I finally had enough sense to go to the information with her, and I went to the information with her, and this old man said, well, son, you just got off the train. You shouldn't have. But he said, there's another train here. He said, you see that sailor boy running down that hallway? He said, you go follow him. That's the train you get on. He gets on, you get on. And I got on. Anyhow, the time had changed on me. When I got to Danville, Virginia to get off, I got there a little early where it was, and I was in that little washroom, my shirt off, washing up my face, and I had to get off the train and a shirt half buttoned and everything. Saw these military moving old boys all standing out there, and I didn't know what this old hayseed was like coming from Oklahoma. And I was so dumb, I wanted to know. I called Colonel Kemper Colony Kemper. Didn't know I was going to be a colonel today, but I called him Colony. I don't know why he wrote on this, but I'm just telling you stuff that happened. And the other thing we did, you know, this was church school, Presbyterian school. It was strict. Boy, you had to go to church every Sunday. Well, we got tired of that a lot of times. Just like any other boy. And so 4 or 5 of us, we just took the clippers and cut our hair all off one night. We cut each one a little so you couldn't change your mind. And we cut it all off. And we walked in the church that morning. We had a cadet cap just like a West Point uniform. Gray and black stripe. Walked down that church like a bunch of convicts. Boy, we really got in trouble. And I walked the bull ring. I don't know how many hours for that.
Walked what?
The bull ring. That was the punishment. You had to walk this square quadrangle. You had to walk it in so many hours. West your rifle and uniform. Anyhow, it's always been good. And you go ahead and ask me some more.
You said that you spent several months each year at Goodland Indian School with your Aunt Lucy
Summertime.
in the summertime.
We'd go to town on Saturday afternoon. I learned how to hitch up little horses. I didn't know how to hitch up a horse. A little buggy we'd ride to town.
Where did your Aunt Lucy stay at the school?
She stayed in one of the dormitory rooms.
And where did you stay?
Stayed in one of them too. Wasn't anybody over there hardly in the summertime. Very few people, very few Indian. Anyhow, we're not very many there, I put it that way.
And what were your duties or your chores in the summer while you stayed there?
Just whatever she wanted me to do, and just over there a young kid having a good time. And taking the pressure off my mother at home. And by the way, one time in Stigler, we were in a buggy, talking about a buggy. We were in Stigler going out to Tomahawk. In Sandboy Creek, you heard of Sandboy Mountain, Sandboy Creek. And we go dirt road, just she and I. And that one of those creeks was up. And there's the creek. And then Aunt Lucy looked at me, and I didn't have enough, I didn't run too old, no too much. She said, oh, we're going to try it. So she just gave the horses the ring. She knew the horses, called them by name. She just let them have it. And they took us through. She had a lot of courage. Let the horses, called them by name, and took us through that water.
Did you know, was Silas Bacon still living when you were?
I just met him. I didn't know him. I met him, put it that way.
Did your Aunt Lucy talk about him?
Well, she knew him. She knew all of him. I can't relate to all that, but she knew. Bailey Springs was more or less superintendent then. He came on later. Because I know Silas Bacon was before Sprague. But
what kind of people were they, Mr. Bacon and Mr. Springs?
Well, of course, Mr. Spring was more of a educated person like we are. I mean, dressed and so forth. I remember Mr. Bacon was kind of, I think he was full blood. Not downgrading, but I mean, Bailey Spring was more of a polished gentleman.
And what about Mrs. Gibbons?
Mrs. Gibbons was very friendly. She was the wife of this Reverend Gibbons. She was very friendly, very outgoing, and they rented this house, a nice home for those days. Had a big front porch and stairs to it, remember that? And she did a lot of the auxiliary work among the women, among the Indians.
What kind of auxiliary work?
Well, like the preacher's wife does, but over there, it's a little different than the preacher's wife today. I don't think they get out of the house, but over there, you know, they lived near her home was the same as a parsonage. And everything that built around it for recreation and everything else.
When you say that the preacher's wife then did what the preacher's wife today would do.
Yes, our preacher's wife today do not go around and visit. Pastors do very little of it.
I was going to say, exactly what would she do as a preacher's wife? Mrs.
Well,
Gibbons?
she would check on the people in the area. If somebody was ill, she'd go call on them. They lived in a close community. They had to be. They all had to be friends. That's all they had. Had to help each other. Just like the picture you showed me the other day that Mr. Kirkpatrick brought up. And then we saw my grandmother and Mathena Thatcher and 3 women sitting there. they were kind of plain looking compared to our women today as far as being having makeup and stuff. They didn't have any, don't they?
Ever hear any stories of Colonel R.M. Jones?
No.
Okay, you know who he is?
Just don't know.
He had the Rose Hill Plantation, which is not far from Goodland.
No, I'm not acquainted with that, sir.
Okay. But he died in the 60s, I think, 1860s. Okay. Bill, do you have any?
You said that what the kind of personality that Bailey Springs or Silas Bacon, your Aunt Lucy, she knew both of them.
Both of them, she respected them, and she was quoting them all the time as far as relating to her work. Obviously, she got along with them.
Now these were both Choctaw.
That's right.
Citizens.
Indians. That's right.
The Goodland School was operated by the, or received some of its support from the Presbyterian Church.
Southern Presbyterian Church.
Southern Presbyterian Church. And as I understand it, it was established about 1850. And it's one of the oldest institutions in Oklahoma.
That's correct. As I understand it. Now
your Aunt Lucy, she's Aunt Lucy
I'll
Hodgson.
hand you this picture of Aunt Lucy and show it to you. Here she is sitting there in her little desk in her room, there's her bed. She's matron.
See, this is at Goodland.
At Goodland, that's Oklahoma Presbyterian College.
Oh,
there.
okay, okay.
And she's a lady who wrote this article out, which I've given to Bill previously, called The Missionary Chant. It's really interesting. I think so, regardless of my connection. And here, as you'll see, is a picture that my Aunt Lucy had of Mary Simple Hodgson, which I have one here, but you already have one. And she tells all about it said, Grandma, you asked me about where Grandmother taught. She loved the Bible better than all else. It was her staff and comfort. She says it was the great book at Pine Ridge, the home of Dr. Kingsbury. I read it through at Old Bennington. The scene of so many days of sunshine and shadows. I read it at Mayhew, that's a Mayhew crossing, isn't it? During the trying days at the close of Civil War. And at Goodwater, near the place where the Comanche enters Red River at Caddo, amid the prairies and the wildflowers, on the bank of Cherokee Sandy at Chickahee. That's where I'd want to know where Chickahee is. And at Woodingwood, that beautiful place that overlooks the famous Washita Valley, and then at Durant, where the closing days of teaching found me. Now I'm in the twilight of my years. 80 summers and 80 winters have come and gone for me. There has never come to my life anything that changed my first impression of the Bible. I've tried to fill every alcove of my memory with some precious promise more powerful than the words of king or emperor. It goes forth to bless every land. Other systems grow old and the books which tell of them pass away. But like the blue sky, the Bible is still just as new as when it came from the hands of the Creator. And she passed from this world August 31st, 1917, with these words on her lips, quote, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet." And that's what Mrs. Lucy K. Forrest wrote, and she was the daughter of Mary Simple Hodgson. And you have a copy, and I'm going to give you this.
Yeah. You say Mary Simple Hodgkins was your grandmother?
Yes. She's the one that's been so prominent to all this missionary background. And she's the hub of this thing. Other than Athena Thatcher and the original Ebenezer Hodgkins, who came on the Trail of Tears. Of course, they're my great-grandparents.
Now, Mary Simple Hodgkins was... Where did she come from?
She's the person I told you came down
okay,
from
that's correct. That's
Steubenville, Ohio.
Okay.
And I wish I had that diary. It's really worth reading. How she came from a wealthy family and came out here, and at Wheelock where she stayed, they looked at her and said, she's too fine a girl. She'll never last out here. She's too frail and too fragile. She's had her clothes always washed by her help in Steubenville. But she says, I fooled them. I wash my own clothes. Anyhow, I'll give you that. Now here's a letter I'm going to give you that hers for the file. I don't want to take time to read it, but this is an original letter which I'll give to from Mary Simple Hodgson to Lucy K. Forrest, my dear Lucy, and she writes. I'm going to give it to you so you can put in your archive. And then here recently, in my telephone bill several years ago, this telephone talk, you've seen them. Sometimes I never look at them, but I happen to look at this one. It says on the cover, there's a cover picture. On the cover, nestled on Clear Creek in McCurtain County, this grist mill began operating in the 1820s. The Reverend Ebenezer Hodgson, that's my great-grandfather, directed an academy there for Choctaw boys from 1836 to 1842. It is believed the spiritual Swing Low Sweet Chariot was composed at this setting. Here's a picture of it. I'll give it to you. I'm going to give all this to you.
Okay, good.
Now here it was in the Oklahoma a while back in '81. Shows Betty Monroe. I know her. She's the wife of the editor of the paper in Alabama. Talks about this. Mentions Ebenezer Hodgson. I'm going to give this to you. And then here's an article I gave you that you may have about Mother of E. Hodgson passed away. And it doesn't have the date here, but I gave you it's February, August 31st, 1917. Gives all about here. She taught in this 40 consecutive years on her tombstone, which is beautiful. It's white granite, beautiful stone. She had Mary Simple Hodgson, missionary to the Choctaws and Chickasaws for 40 years. I don't know her date of birth, it's on there, and then the date she died.
Where's she buried?
Stigler, I'm on the few who knows where it is. Stigler Cemetery. If you ever go over there, it's the near the northeast corner.
Yeah, I've done some interviews in the Stigler area.
Okay,
Stigler,
all right. These are the same towns I mentioned a while ago: Wheelock, Goodwell, Mayhew, Old Bennington, Caddo, Chickahee, Wynnewood, and Durant. She came to Durant in 1896 with her son Ebenezer Hodgson and taught in the Old Cowan Institute. Now that's a point that preceded the Oklahoma Presbyterian College. That's right.
Where was it located?
Durant too.
Durant also.
Mrs. Hodgson was married in 1860. She married Henry Hodgson. That's my grandfather, the one that had a sawmill from cattle.
Yes, he's the son of the old Ebenezer Hodgkins, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Henry Hodgson, son of Ebenezer Hodgson, missionary to the Choctaws in Mississippi in 1928. 9 children were born to this union. 6 of them are yet living. Okay, now that's where Ann Simple comes in. Mr. Charlie Simple of Caddo, now deceased, was her youngest brother. He came with her from Steubenville, Ohio in the 60s and made his home with her. Well, anyhow, and then here's a picture. I'll give you another one. Here she is. That's the old home of Stigler where I lived. That was Aunt Lucy's home, and we lived, Mother and I, we lived there. She lived in her home then those days. Then this is a classic. Is a copy of the handwritten. I think you have the handwritten one I gave. How I became a missionary. It gives the whole history. It's really, whether she ain't kidding me or not, it would be interesting, abstractly. And then here's one on Uncle Eb. You asked about him. I think you have this picture too, but I didn't afford another one. My mother and Eb. And this says, white man preacher, Indian teacher. You seen this one? And he says, after 40 years in Indian education, Dr. Ebenezer Hodgson is retiring from the Oklahoma Presbyterian College and so forth. We know of no one who has had more friends among the Indians in Oklahoma than Dr. Hodgson. Of no one whose teaching have had a more wholesome effect upon the lives of the present generation of Indians in the southeastern part of the state. And then it goes on about his grandfather who trekked with the Indians from Mississippi on the Trail of Tears at the time of the Great Removal. So will the lot of this and future generations be made better one by having had Dr. Hodgson. This was editorial in Tuscaloosa, Stride, Oklahoma, 1935. I'm going to give this to you. And I've already mentioned this.
Did you know your grandfather?
I beg your pardon?
Did you know your grandfather?
No, I never knew him. He died. Yeah.
Okay.
Mother's father. I never knew him. Now this is, I've given you all this more bit, but you can have it because I've done all I can do with it. I think I still have some prose of it. And this came out of the whole, this has no relation, but this is a deal you might want on. I knew Ben Dwight personally, real well. And then, in case you have another one of these, it won't hurt to have another one. That's one on Tina Thatcher. That's first thing I'm reading about. She talks about the ferry and then ending drinking on the Texas side to get the whiskey. So nobody has a monopoly on that. And then, so you can tell that colonel business comes out. And here's a sketch part of on her own mother, grandmother. And here's another one of my mother, which I'm so proud of. You can put that, you'll have another file. And then here's one that shows a new president when Dr. Ebenezer retires. He retired in the meeting of Oklahoma Preparatory College of Trustees, May 8, 1935. Dr. Ebenezer Hodgson presented his resignation. Major Bramlett was elected to succeed him. You can have this too, whatever y'all don't want you to toss. I've given you these already.
When you were at the military school in Danville,
Yes,
how long were you there?
1 year, and I learned a lot. I wasn't a little old boy that went up there.
Why did they send you to the military school?
My mother had to go to school in Oklahoma University to get her master's, and they didn't know what to do with me.
Why did they choose Danville?
Well, they heard about it. They advertised at a Presbyterian military school.
How old were you when you went
I
there?
couldn't have been over 15.
So what was your reaction on the train going up there?
Well, I just remember, of course, since then, of course, I've traveled the world many, many times, been everywhere, but that was a big trip for me. Going from Durant to McAllister was something. Come on in.
You were talking about your reaction going up to the
Oh, well, I was just a
school.
young boy, and the first time I'd ever really been away at home for a period of time to speak up. But I shall never forget it, and I learned a lot. And
Who was head of the school when you were there?
Colonel Kipper, K-M-P-E-R. It's since gone. They've torn it down. We drove by there several years ago, and I went to the site.
How big was the school? How many?
Well, it wasn't very big. It had a kind of a quadrangle building, about two stories high, and this was dormitory, and then there on the bottom floor were classrooms. I imagine it didn't have over 200 students. I have an old annual somewhere that shows some of Bennett. And here is, I'll give you this too. This is a clipping from Uncle Ed. Dr. Hodgson, retired president, died. This came out, I'm sure, in Oklahoma, I think November 7, 1956. And then it gives all about him. He received his early education at home from his mother near Caddo, and later attended Haskell Institute. He worked as a cowboy on an Oklahoma ranch. Determined to become a teacher, he attended Park College, Parkville, Missouri, and Fort Worth University. He started teaching in Indian Presbyterian School in Oklahoma and later became an ordained minister. He was named president of the Old Calvin Institute in 1901. That later became Presbyterian College. 1927, Austin College of Sherman conferred an honorary degree of Doctor of Divinity upon him. During his presidency, OPC grew tremendously. He raised more than $100,000 for the school from wealthy Indians and friends in Oklahoma. He is survived by his children. And by gosh, I think they're all gone, you know the truth.
You said you went to kindergarten in Stigler?
Stigler, Oklahoma.
What was the name of the school that you attended?
Well, it was in the old high school building.
How many years did you attend school in Stigler?
Well, I attended 1 year, and I was just like any other young obstetrician kid. I remember the teacher put tape over my mouth to keep me from talking. Likewise, I remember that I was left-handed. She tried to change me. My mother objected and said, "No, you can't. You're not supposed to change the left-handed boy. Leave him alone." I remember those things. All right, my friend Joe. Now,
do you have any memories of World War I?
yes, barely. You might I remember? I was obviously very young, but I remember the whistles blowing when the war was over at night.
Was this in Stigler?
Stigler, 1918. I also remember, as I said, Stigler kind of had 4 streets, one running north and south, one east and west, and had kind of a square there in the center. And I remember, I know you never saw one of these, a little building, built cupolas, kind of like a bandstand. That's where you can go and spend 25 cents, get a 25-cent stamp, and bond stamp, buy stamps.
Was there a big victory celebration at Stigler?
I can't remember that other than the whistles blowing.
Yeah.
It surely did blow. And I remember later soldiers coming home off the train. That's all I remember. I'm surprised I remember that, but I certainly did. A long time ago. All right, sir.
Do you have any history of Wheelock? Any stories you heard?
None other than I've been telling, relating to how very simple Hodgson taught there. And of course, you get involved there with the old Armstrong Academy, which was near Blue and Durand. And then there's another academy in there that's famous. I can't recall it right now. But they all relate to each other in those early days. Fort Towson was a famous place.
Was there Jones Academy?
Might have been the Jones Academy, yes sir. I think that was it out of Durand.
Yeah.
But Fort Towson was a famous place in those days. That was one of their meeting places.
What stories did your grandmother tell you about teaching at Wheelock? What stories do you remember her telling you?
Well, primarily, I've told you one about the Indians coming and their disciplinary problems, but she used the old-fashioned word governed. I governed. In other words, when she ran the school. But she said at first, you had to gain their respect first, and later their love came. That was how she did it.
Is there anything left at Boggy Depot?
Sir?
Is there anything left
Oh
at
yes,
Boggy Depot?
I went to Boggy Depot a couple of years ago. Hazel and me, my wife, we visited there, and I have Kodak pictures of the gravesite of Cyrus Kingsbury. Allen Wright was a contemporary. They were contemporaries. In fact, Muriel Wright, who was here so long, is buried at Boggy Depot.
Yeah.
They made a little state park there adjacent to the actual cemetery area. I'd say the cemetery there is about an acre, not too big. Maybe more than an acre.
The Allen Wright home was there.
I think so. Now you're getting them in a little too deep, but all I know about those old missionaries were famous, and the Kingsburys and the Wrights and the Hodgkins were all contemporaries of the oldest ones that came. and since then it's their relation
Yeah.
coming on down, even like myself. But Muriel Wright here was very famous, and that's in Oklahoma Historical Society. She's been deceased several years.
Yeah, I knew her.
She's buried back there, I understand. But they're very famous. Were really.
After you left the military school at Danville, where did you go?
Well, I came back home, and I finished high school in Durant. I went to Durant High School, and then I went to what they call Russell High School, adjacent to the Southeastern Teachers College, which was their practice school for their teachers to practice on. So I've been practiced on by many famous people of Oklahoma. And by going to summer school, I graduated in college. I took a degree at Southeastern State College in 1932. My mother was Dean of Women then, and she had a picture of a snapshot where we both had on our cap and gown. And then from
Now, what year did you graduate from high school?
29.
29.
Got through high school 3 years, going to summer school too. And I was close friend to the Bennett family. Henry Bennett Jr. and I were close friends. Now, Dr. Bennett went to Durant, went to Southeastern, Oklahoma A&M College in 28. I recall. I stayed a year back at Southeastern and finished my. I wasn't graduated then. Finished part of. Had some college work, and then I had been working on the campus at Southeastern for about 30 cents an hour. Unheard of it. 15 when we first started.
What kind of job were you?
Oh, we planted trees. We worked on the truck garbage. We gardened. Mr. Johnson was the maintenance supervisor. Most of the magnolia trees today on that beautiful campus, I helped plant. Dug the holes. And then Gene Briggs came to be president, and he was a football guy, and they gave my job to a football player. And so then I rushed up to Stillwater where Dr. Bennett was in 1929. I was full freshman then. And I was full freshman then. And I top tables, bus boy, everywhere at the cafeteria at A&M College in 29.
Where was the cafeteria at that time?
It was just north of the old engineering building there. And
Is that where the classroom building is now?
well, it's adjacent to Morrill Hall.
Oh, the old. Okay, I'm
You go away
getting too late. Yeah, I was there. Went there 2 years.
Well, you know, back. Then I stayed there a freshman year and got my. I was placed a Cap Sigma attorney. I remember that. I had a hard time making it and paying the dues. Finally got initiated. Then I came back to Southeastern. That's when mother was still there, of course, and I finished there. I got my degree in 32. Then.
Why did you go back to Southeastern from A&M?
Well, I think financial much the same thing, and be at home with my mother.
I was going to ask, how did the Depression affect the college
That's what I'm going to
education?
tell you. I got out in 1932 with a degree. I saw the Depression. I remember them killing cows for $7 a head.
What was your major?
I had a biology major, then a teaching major, and then I had a administration, science major. So I couldn't get a job in 32. There wasn't anything to do. In fact, it's a blessing to me in one way. And I went back to Stillwater, Dr. Bennett again, and gave me a graduate assistant job, and I got $50 a month grading papers. I got a master's degree in 33. It's been helping me all my life on paper. It looked good on paper. On my Army record, MA degree on it, that looked good way back in those days. So the Depression, in fashion, helped me. Okay, then after that, I'm trying to think what I did. I got a little job in Washington, D.C. in the Roosevelt deal.
Okay. Before we go to D.C., what kind of man was Dr. Bennett?
Tell you all about him. I knew him all the time, my life. As I told you later, I was pallbearer at his funeral years ago. He was a kind, gentle purpose, a person, but he could be firm. He was a master diplomat, absolute master politician that still keep his integrity. Best ever come to Oklahoma. I think sometimes he's honest, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I think he didn't let what his left hand did or his right did, as long as he was going down the middle. He knew all the governors. He knew how to guess them. And I'm sure he played several sides.
Now, was it Dr. Bennett that started the big building at A&M?
That's right. Building program, and he believed if you got a building up, he wouldn't tear it down. He borrowed his first one to issue revenue bonds, self-liquidating revenue bonds. And he told me many times his force they'll never tear them down. In other words, if it defaulted on the bonds, that building's still going to be there. And he believed that. He built a beautiful campus. He's the one that had that campus plan that Phil Wilbur, the university architect, developed. I knew Phil personally.
Where did he get the idea for the, I guess, the colonial architecture?
Colonial, Jamestown, and University of Virginia. He got the idea of two boards from Harvard. They had a board of, that's where these state regents came in. Our state regents for higher education superimposed over the Board of Control that we have called the A&M Board of Regents now, Oklahoma State University and A&M Board of Regents. That's the board I worked for, as I'll tell you, for 22 and a half years. But you kept asking me about Dr. Bennett, and as I lived in the basement home, and I'd go upstairs, I stayed away from them. I didn't infringe on their privacy. And another student and I stayed downstairs, and we had a bath laboratory, an wash basin, and we'd take a bath in a big old galvanized sink they had over there to wash clothes in. That's where I took my bath. So I've done a little everything, and little did I dream when I told at my retirement party with the Board of Regents, little did I dream that I would ever be one of the top officials governing Oklahoma State University when I hadn't been a busboy and washed dishes and cooked hotcakes, which I did.
So you stayed in the Bennett home and you worked in the cafeteria?
That's right. I did.
How many students were at A&M when you were going there?
Oh, I can't remember. Of course, we got around 4,000 now. Couldn't have been over 8,000 or 10,000.
Has it always been larger than OU?
Now that's transition. I think under Bennett, of course, the building program I think surpassed OU. OU's been ahead. Then the enrollment would fluctuate in view of the prestige of University of Oklahoma and the athletic department. They'd get more students. Now Oklahoma University has a wonderful school, no question about that. I certainly wouldn't fault that. But today, the basic enrollment at OSU is bigger than OU. And this is kind of personal. Where I live out in northwest part of town, there are a bunch of oil millionaires. I don't have any money, but they have some friends that do. They all graduated from OU, but they sent their children to OSU. And they'd call me, Forrest, so-and-so's in trouble, I want you to help about it. I can't do everything with those kids. I'll do the best I can. But that's the truth. That's the fact of life.
Did you attend the OU and A&M game when you were a student there?
Sir, I've been going to the OU and OSU game since 1929 when Lynn Waldorf was coach. And he had the pony backfield. And to my knowledge, I can't remember 3 or 4 times OSU and A&M beating OU. And I do not like to go to the game. We have one this Saturday, for example. Hayes and I are going to Dallas. I'm not going to go. Now, you're asking me some questions.
I went to both schools. I went to OSU and OU.
Well, my wife went to OU a little while. She has a degree. But, no, I know all about it. And, of course, with the Board of Regents, we would reciprocate every game. When OU come to Stillwater, our board would entertain them pretty nice. Likewise, they would do us the same. Have a dinner for us before the game. See that we all had good tickets if we didn't have any, and we'd do the same for them. And I knew the chairman of the BOU region one day, Judy Rothbard. He said, "Why don't you come sit with me in my private box?" I said, "I wouldn't dare sit with you in my private box, and these other board members not have as good a seat." I said, "No way." But you know, when Dr. Bennett died, Gene Harrell was chairman of the Board of Regents still. Colonel Stewart was on the board, who was the daddy of Bobby Stewart of Mid-Continent Life. And Gittner Drummond, a rancher from Hominy, prominent men, they were rough as a cob. And Dr. Bennett and those three men ran the board. Hell, they just ran it. They had 9 members, but these others, I'm not downgrading them, but these other guys would decide what they were going to do. Well, when Bennett died, I was on a member of the State Industrial Commission. It's now a court where you have compensation cases. Gene Harrell came to me and said, "Now, Forrest, you know all the background of Stillwater. You know the Dr. Bennett regime, and we need somebody with the Board of Regents, administrators, executive secretary." Well, just diversion a minute. Bennett tried to get me there 4 years ago when I was secretary. Before that, Roy Turner, I wouldn't go. I said, "No, I'll help you with Turner." That's all I'm doing. So they came to me, and I was on the industrial commission. I think I was getting $7,200. That's pretty good in those days. And I think I got a $300. I think I got $7,500 when I went to the Board of Regents at Stillwater. And I walked in there that day. Imagine how I felt. And Dick conference table, Councilor Reeves said, Gittner Drummond, he's a rough old couple. And McIntire, don't you get any idea. Said, "You're nothing but a clerk." Well, after all, I've been secretary to the governor 4 years. I've been on the industrial court 2 years. I had a master's degree. I was a young, full bird colonel in China at the age of 33 in the Inspector General's department. So really I wasn't just a clerk. So I was going to change that, and I did. I traveled. We had 9 colleges, all of them, Panhandle, Oklahoma, Langston, Cameron, Murray, Eastern, Okmulgee Tech, Connors. They never had a person in that position. I had an office in the Capitol here where I had a secretary handle the claims, stamp my name to the payroll, and we processed and mailed the check. So when I traveled, Hazel reminded me of that. I was gone a good deal. I'd go to these colleges. I had business with them. I first got the agenda before the next meeting. I knew everything was going to come up. And if I got within 50 miles of a board member, I'd go see him on official business. And I knew him. Well, boy, we broke that up, and we members started exercising as a group of 9. As long as you had 5, that was a quorum. That you could pass anything. But when you pass board bond issues, you need the whole board, not just a quorum.
What was Mr. Drummond's reaction to this?
Later, we became bosom friends. I was at his deathbed in the hospital in Tulsa, so I couldn't have been too bad. On my retirement, they asked me at the dinner, gave me a nice dinner. That was 74. Someone asked me and says, "Forrest, how did you survive 22 and 21 and a half, 22 years?" I said, "Well, I served under 6 different governors, 24, worked with 24 different college presidents, and worked with 35 different board members." Now, how did you survive all that in Oklahoma? Well, I kind of smiled. I'll tell you, it wasn't that difficult. I said, I knew every board member by heart. I knew nearly what he thought because of my job, too. And when a controversial matter would come up, and should they ask me a question about the matter, I could look around the table and see where a majority was, and I'd always decide with the majority. Well, no one's going to get rid of that. Then Henry Bellman was governor, and a close friend of William, or William was president. William had a friend in Bellman when he was going to school and helped him up there get a job. And Bellman went to see the president. William said, we've got to get rid of McIntire. He's just too powerful. He shouldn't have that much power. And Oliver said, Henry, whatever he called him, he said, no, that's not true. He says, am I taking too... He said, all McIntire is doing is what the board tells him to do. And your appointees are telling him what to do. Henry still wasn't satisfied. He called a meeting of his appointees on that board, like Ladd Hitch and Burke Healy and Myberg and some of them, had a dinner here in Oklahoma City. They wanted to get rid of me. They said, no, we're not going to get rid of him. He's honest, he does a good job, he treats each one of us like we're a general. All we have to do is come and listen and sign our name. He does it all. I'm bragging now, but no one else brag on myself. But that's how I survived. And my name's on most of those buildings, of the recent buildings. But I gave 22 years of my life. Of course, I was reasonably remunerated, not as much as they do today, of course. I'm very jealous of A&M College, OSU, much time. And getting back to Dr. Bennett, he wanted to take me with the .4 program, and I didn't want to go. And I went to Washington the same. And we stayed at the Washington Hotel. We had dinner up on the roof garden. And my plane that night coming home, I was supposed to go and talk to him, you know. Well, I was tired, I went to sleep. He got to Tulsa while the A&M plane took him. I went on to Oklahoma City, and that was October. He was killed in December, 3 months later. That's reading, and I knew him so well, I was one of the pallbearers. So that's the Bennett history.
Then you took the job in D.C.
Oh, I didn't take the .4 job, but you asked me that way back there. I got a little job after the relief in the AAA, Agriculture Adjustment Administration. That's when they kill the cattle and set them aside. I was just a little old auditor auditing claims. Well, that was 33. Didn't make much. I think I got 1620 or 1640, and finally I think I got 1800. And I came home, I married a childhood girl. I mean, a girl I'd known from Durand. And December 33, the 9th of December. I couldn't live in Washington to be married on that little money. I was on the sidewalk, so I just couldn't do it. So I got married for enough money to come home. And I got a little job with out here in the Panhandle with the Highway Department as one of the Rodman surveying crew. Didn't make much. And I had to leave my wife at Shawnee with her folks. Wasn't enough money to keep her going. Then I heard about a friend said, now you can get you a job with this called Metropolitan Life Insurance, or the debit. Go around and collect these little weekly policies, and then you sell if you can at Durand and Medill. So I went there and did that for a little over 2 years, I guess. And then in 35, I was a lieutenant in an officer reserve corps. And the CC camp came along. And I went on active duty with the Army to help run a CC camp. And I started a camp at Lake Murray when they were building that. My wife and I had a room and board deal in Ardmore, still poor. And finally, I got a little more money with some assistance, and I went over to the Old Muggy and CC camp there, 2809.
When did you join the officer corps, Reserve Officer Corps?
All right, I'll tell you. When I was in Stillwater, I took ROTC. Then I'd had this year of military school and stuff. And I passed an examination and then took these extension courses. But I was eligible before I was 21, and they enlisted me then in what they call the Enlisted Reserve Corps, a private in the infantry. And when I was 21, they gave me my commission as second lieutenant. And that 1 year helped me all through my military, gave me 1 more year of longevity on health pay scale, if you know anything about
Did
it.
you have to go through a basic training when?
Not after that, because I'd passed this test and I took these extension courses. But make a long story short, I went into the CC camp, and my wife stayed with me. We moved to Oklahoma. I had to go to Fort Houston for school and school as a mess officer. Don't forget that. Okay, then about this time, WPA and the relief was here, and they called National Youth Administration. Houston Wright was head of it. Houston and I were friends, took our masters together at Stillwater. He offered me a job, the district director at McAllister, and I had the southeastern Oklahoma counties. My job was commensurate to the district director of WPA. I only mind with a youth program, NYA. And I had that. And then I got in the campaign of, I've done lots of things. Got in the campaign of Gomer Smith, and I was one of his speakers. Down through.
Now, what year was this?
This is had to be 38, I guess it was. And yeah, 38.
If I could, I'd like to get some information on how the CCC camps were organized.
Boy, you didn't have it. I know it. Grew up with it. They had districts and they had sub-districts, and each little district had so many CC camps. Like they had one at Broken Bow, they had one at Lake Murray, they had one at Okmulgee, they had one at Cache and Lawton, and they had some out in the northwest. Then they had a commissary warehouse, one they had for Okmulgee over at Muskogee. Army was a regular Army major. The regular Army ran it. We were reserve officers, most of us. But our regular Army was Major Graves. And would you believe it, years ago afterwards, when I was a colonel in India and China, I saw Colonel Graves. He never did get to be a star. And he was a major when I was way back here as a lieutenant. That's a small world.
What were your duties?
All right. I learned a lot. I was mess officer. I had to feed them. I ran supply. I had to clothe them. I ran the paycheck. I had to take the cash and pay table if you've ever been in the military. And I had to run a little PX. I was second in command. Later I was commander for a while. Had to do it all.
What rank were you?
I was first lieutenant.
First lieutenant.
Yeah, okay. Then after Gomer Smith's deal, I had to leave my job on NY for political activity. Houston said, if I don't let you go, they'll fire you. I said, well, I'll get out. And Elmer Thomas was about to be defeated, and President Roosevelt came down here and turned that election around in 2 weeks. This is history. And Elmer went. Well, I was out of job for a little while. Oh, I'd say 2 or 3 months. Then I got a job up here with the Board of Agriculture, and Joe Scott was one of their feed inspectors, which kind of a supernumerary deal. And then the World War came along here, too. And I took summer camp in August for a month. I guess that was 40. You want me to shut up or
No,
not bother you?
no,
Am I
no.
slowing y'all up?
No, not at all.
And I went on active duty for a month and down in Fort DeRidder, down DeRidder, Louisiana, which you're familiar with. Then from September to December, I worked here for Gene Harrell down one of these cotton association compress. Okay, December 15th, 40. 45th had already gone in September. I went on active duty at Fort Crockett, Texas, first lieutenant, and I was an adjutant of the 69th Coast Artillery Anti-Aircraft Regiment. From there I got transferred to the 45th Division here.
Before we get involved in World War II,
Yeah.
I'd like to get some information on the difference between the WPA and the NYA.
Okay. Of course, the WPA had more or less specific projects to work on. They built buildings. You've seen the rock buildings, the armory, the school. And they did a lot of good. And they built revetments and trenches to help the highway drainage. NY had smaller jobs. Some of them, just to be frank, were made jobs for them. Around the school buildings, around the school grounds. And then later they came on what they call a student aid program, where they got so much money to go to school. And but it served a purpose. But there's been lots of jokes about the WPA, as we all know. We piddle around WPA and all that stuff. That General W.S. Key was head of Oklahoma, later ran for governor, later was commander of the 45th today. I don't mind him personally.
What was the age difference between the WPA people and NYA?
Well, of course, the age difference was the NYA were young kids under 20. The WPA were mature men, household, head of household.
Now, was NYA organized like the CCC camp?
Not as well. Not as concise or as well organized as far as administration. They had that NY had a state director and staff, and they had a district, but CCC, that Army, they meant business. They didn't fool around. They did a lot of good. They sent those allotments home to those poor parents. The boys think they got about $15 plus their board and room and
my father's in the
clothes,
CCC
and got
camp.
$25. I'm bragging on them, as far as I'm concerned.
If the economy was so bad in the Depression, where did the money come to pay for the CCC, WPA, NYA?
Federal government. Roosevelt. He got the people off the streets. Got the boys.
Whose idea were these programs? Who thought them up?
I'm just really not smart enough to know why Roosevelt got this idea. I'm just not familiar with that. Of course, coming way on back down here, John Kennedy went and thought up the Peace Corps. But I just can't, it was Roosevelt. I guess some of his liberal aides he had there. He had a bunch of Tugwell and those things.
Now, I've heard about the state relief program before.
Well, the state relief program was a welfare board here where they gave commodities, they gave food, didn't give food stamps, and then just anybody with abject poverty could get on, and later that's how we had a lot of the scandals here in Oklahoma, where these senators got involved in getting people on the welfare and then getting some of the checks, you know about that. I don't want to mention any names on that. But we may have to come to it again some way if this thing keeps going. I told you how old I am. I'm 74, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm glad I've gotten this far. But this country is in a heck of a shape in the sense of morality. The standards, everything we used to believe in now is an accommodation. Anything at the moment, anything goes. They tap you on the shoulder. And how many, all the United States, we have thousands on death row are just sitting there and they probably never get executed. They ought to do like they do in the Arabian country. I've been to Arabia, I've been all over there. And I've seen the Bedouin wanderings, Bedouin tent people. I've been to Baghdad, I've been to Iraq, I've been to Tehran, I've been to Jerusalem, and I've been to Turkey, Syria, I've been to Istanbul, and all those places, and in the last 10 years. Well, those Arabs, they have discipline. No one rapes their women either. And if they get caught stealing or doing any crime, if stealing especially, they just cut his hand off. He's marked for life. They don't give him another trial. They don't ask any questions. My God, we need something. Now, there's something else we need. We need, instead of these country club prisons, so to speak, they're really not. But why don't we build some more of these prisoner war camps like we have? They're good RCC camps. Put a fence around them. I lived in a tent out here at Barclay 2 years. Not bad. Had a common place for a washroom and take a shower. You're going to live all right. And they ought to have to do it instead of having. Then the federal government comes along, they have to have better facilities. The hell with that business. That's the way I feel about it, and as I'm telling you, they can't cheat me out of much. Therefore, I can say what I please as long as I do not get on anybody else's. But like the word right.
Two. Where were you on Pearl Harbor Day, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor?
Well, sir, I'll tell you where I was. It was on Sunday. I was on a weekend pass from Camp Barclay to Oklahoma Stillwater, and I was in Dr. Bennett's home, listening to the radio when it came on. And a friend of mine was with me, a Willard Williams, a lieutenant, and we had a car. We jumped in our car and headed direct to Abilene, Texas, to Camp Barclay. They had on a uniform, and even with a uniform, we had a hard time getting in that post that night. We had to identify ourselves. They just clamped everything down. That's where I was. I was in uniform.
Did you have any idea that the war was coming?
No, not Pearl Harbor. I'll tell you about the deals on the bombs where I was in China on that, but not the Pearl Harbor attack. But I was already in service, and boy, you could tell it, and the security around that post tightened.
What, were you still in infantry, or?
No, I was on the division staff then. I was assistant adjutant general on General Key's staff.
So you were 45th Division?
45th Division. I got to be a major there. He promoted me from first lieutenant to a captain to a major. I stayed with him from Camp Barclay. I transferred to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. Key was there. I was on the advanced guard train that moved the troops into Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And I was the one on duty that delivered the orders, secret orders, on a Saturday afternoon. I didn't open the orders, handed the envelope to General Key that relieved him and sent him to Iceland. I was an errand boy that gave him...
Why was he relieved and sent to Iceland?
He wasn't a West Pointer, and they had others. They had promised him, though, when I say they higher up, that they would let him take this division overseas, but they didn't do it. They made him at Iceland, and later he was provost marshal or something in London, but not with the 45th. General Middleton came in, Colonel Middleton, whom I knew personally. And Colonel Middleton was a colonel in World War I, and he was comptroller of finance for Louisiana University, I think Louisiana University. And General Middleton later took the division to Pine Camp, New York, from Fort Devens, and he took them overseas. I left the division at Pine Camp, New York, but before I left there, Key had already promoted me to a colonel, to a captain, then a major. And Lee Thompson was G1, a good friend of mine. He was the daddy of Federal Judge Ralph Thompson. I knew little Ralph Thompson when he was a little boy up at Fort Devens. And then at Fort Pine Camp, why, I had put in for the Inspector General's school. I was encouraged to apply, and I put in, but I never did get to hear from him. Then I also had put in for the School of Military Government, Charlottesville. It was supposed to be the elite school, which it wasn't. And I went there. I didn't make any big record there, but I got by. But fortunately, the Inspector General's orders came through. They wanted me up there, and I'd go to Washington, interview this colonel. He said, "Yeah, we want you." And he said, but he said, "You're going to have to go over to the Air Transport Command. They need some young Inspector Generals." He said, "If you can go over to this colonel's speech, and if he likes you, you've got an assignment." I just freelance. I was free. Didn't have any place to go. I was out of the 45th. What you call permanent change of station. But I went over to see Colonel Space, and boy, he was tough. No World War I retread. Knocked on the door, went in there and stood at attention. Pulled my hand up to salute. I think he held me to my salute for a minute before he returned it, and I sat down. And I had on a Kappa Sig ring. I'm not much of a fraternity guy. Then he looked at it and he said, where were you at Captain Sigma? Oh, I says, Oklahoma A&M College, Oklahoma Stillwater. He said, well, I'm a Kappa Sigma. I was a Kappa Sigma from Hampton-Sydney College in Virginia, about 1900 or something. He says, you look all right, I just think I'll take you. He picked up the phone and called the Air Force Office Inspector General. He said, I'll take Major McIntire, cut orders, transfer them over here to the air transport. All by myself, didn't know anybody. And he said, do you want some leave? I said, I just had 10 days leave, sir. I don't want to leave. He said, well, he said, we've got a spot over in London. We need 10 cents to. It's fine with me. I'm ready to go anywhere. Well, he said, you work here now for a few days, a week or so, and said, you get around and get acquainted. And then he called me and he said, now, McIntire, said, this major I was going to send to London is too old. He's a retread. But he said, we need one over on the hump, China, Burma, India. I said, I'll obviously go anywhere I'm ordered. That way I wouldn't have no choice. Fine with me. Okay, all by myself, took a foot locker. Like a darn so-and-so, I put my foot locker, mostly Army regulations, which I didn't need over there. Should have filled it with whiskey. But anyhow, went on the train down to Orlando, Florida. And there I caught had to spend the night. I had a staging area there, and I took still by myself. They flew me in a big C-54 to Georgetown, British Guiana. There jumped down to, by the way, that's in the tropics. I'd never seen the tropics. And boy, they had the officers club, and I saw this covered tunnel, you know, and you go in there, and there's this club, and they had the bar, biggest bar I ever saw, and you could buy rum and cola for 15 cents. And I tried my share, and the next day I went on to Natal, Brazil, and then that jumps off across the South Atlantic. And I got on a C-46 there, just the crew and myself. I was the only passenger, and then put my name on the manifest. And they had bags on there. I didn't pay attention to that. And this crew chief came back. I was a young major. I could tell that. I said, now, Major, there's nothing to worry about. I said, now, there have been some submarines come up shooting at these planes. That was that southern ramp. He said, they're not very, that kind of scares. He said, now, just one island out there. You just can't miss it. That's Ascension Island. Oh, my God, you could miss it, you know. So we landed at Ascension. It's built up an old volcanic deal that's leveled off. We got over to a crawl on the Gold Coast. Now remember, there was a lot of racking. I had a staff car. And I went into town, a little town of Crawl, had these old cobblestone bricks. I went in what we'd call a little honky-tonk. There were a bunch of soldiers in there and had no winding Victrola. And you know, they're all, these GIs were dancing with these black gals. I just couldn't put up with that. I hadn't been overseas too long for that. So I just went back to the base. And I soon got out of there. And you know, on that same plane I was on, my foot locker was on. That would never happen again. I went across from Accra to Kano, Dugri, Khartoum, Aden, Arabia, and there to Karachi, India. Went up across Karachi, where Agra, that's where the Taj Mahal is. Went on up to the valley, it's called Chaba. And it was raining cats and dogs, and I got out, and I got no weapons, carried a car, went up to this little old tent, bamboo basket. They had a field phone. Some sergeant was on the phone, said, send the L5 plane. They got a major over there, and you can pick him up. And I got in that L5. Unfortunately, I fastened the seatbelt. And they buzzed a little old grass place to bring my cattle off. And they stopped, and they said the headquarters up there, that tea plantation. And I took my B4 bag and walked up through the tea bushes to the headquarters of the India-China Wing. Later became the India-China Division. When I was there, they had 3,000 strength. When I left, they had 45,000. And I went from major to lieutenant colonel to full colonel under General Tunner, who were later in the Berlin airlift. And I had a rough go out by myself, but fortunately my training, basic training in the military of the 45th Division, I was checked out on all individual weapons. I knew the score, and I had new discipline, and I knew what you could do and what you couldn't do. And as Inspector General, I helped lots of people, and I didn't gig them unless it was their fault. If it was higher headquarters' fault, I would gig higher headquarters. Inspector General can write an action letter, no one can stop it. It has to go all the way. And then we'd travel, and I had a C-47. I had two majors as pilots. We'd hit a base, and we'd check the supply. We'd check the operations of the line. We'd check the mess hall. We'd check the finance, and everything. Stay there 2 or 3 days at one base. I'd have a complaint session. I'd always have it away from the orderly rooms where the boys would come to see me. I could look at a boy, tell him how long he'd been over there. He'd been on gin or about to crack up, and I'd get their names. When I'd go in to see the general, I'd hand him a list of names, my little note. I said, General, these boys need to be sent home. Just send them back, save the government a lot of money. Had a lot of power, and he'd send them home just on my name. And one place, the theater commander gave me a wire to go inspect the military police company, which wasn't under our company. They could send me anywhere. So I went over there, chopper, and it was good. It was clean in the tent. Now the streets had been swept. Every tent was clean. Rifles were perfect. Just too clean. I bought something wrong. And there's a captain there, an old World War I captain. He was a rough martinet. He thought I was dirt, but he was afraid to get out of line, because after all, I was Inspector General. He was just as civil, did all the things he's supposed to do, and nothing more. Had a complaint session, nobody came. Well, I was staying over here at the polo ground. They were called bamboo bashes. They were made out of bamboo. Where we stayed, visiting officer quarters alike. And that night, their company area was about a mile from where I was. I stayed up all night listening to those boys come to see me complain. They were actually just in jail, Martinet. Well, I was impressed, of course, and I went to great pains, and I wrote what's called an Inspector General action letter to the theater commander, General Stillwell. Had to go through all these commands. I described just what I'm telling you, how nice and clean it was, just perfect. Nobody came to complain. So I was kept up all night by over 150 boys coming to see me. And I, in my recommendation, I recommended that the officer be relieved immediately, that he was temperamentally unfit to command. Signed that thing, and he got off. Pretty soon, in New Delhi, hell, it was 1,000 miles where I was. I got a TWX to report to the commanding general, General Stillwell's headquarters, to the Inspector General. I scared him. I was still a young major then. Well, I got on. I could get on any plane. I flew to New Delhi all by myself, scared. I don't know what the hell I'm getting into now. And Colonel Griswold was the theater inspector general. Had a lot of power. Regular Army. First he thought I was just some little nincompoop. Got talking to him. He said, "Now, Major, just tell me exactly what happened. You wrote this letter." I said, "Yes." I didn't know that Griswold and Colonel Provost Marshal were buddies. And he was a friend of the Provost Marshal for the theater. And the officer I was relieving was one of his buddies. But Griswold listened to me, and he said, "McIntire, I believe your story." And he says, "The officer whom you recommended to be relieved will be relieved." He said, "Thank you very much for coming." I said, "Thank you, sir. Goodbye." I was telling him instant. He'd listen to this song. So it wasn't all easy. And there were some nice parts. I got to accompany Paulette Goddard, the movie actress, for a week over the hump. China and helped entertain her. I never did date her or anything. Just helped her see that she.
What is the hump?
It's the Himalayas. It's the route from India to China over the highest mountains in the world. And you had unescorted air cargo plane, American planes carrying cargo. The cargo was primarily gasoline to supply the planes in China to fight the Japanese. It was a dangerous operation. And a lot of our pilots would have to fight the Zeros by hiding in the clouds. Our boys were unarmed. They were sitting ducks.
Why were they unarmed?
Well, we just didn't have armed cargo. Didn't have any fighter squadron. Finally, at the last, they had a little fighter cover. But they just had to go by the elements. And I want to tell you something. It was really something.
How many?
War of attrition. We had about, I had about 6 bases right on the base of India called Assam. Jorhat, Tezpur, Moranbah, and so forth. And where these planes were. And these were the bases I had to go to inspect. And I had them in China. I had Chintu. I went up to Chen Kong. I went up to Xi'an where the B-29s took off the flight to go to Guam to bomb Japan. And then out of Kunming, Yunnan, I saw those markers there where the B-25s had crashed coming back from Doolittle's raid. Now that's the hump. And we first started to, I remember there, Roosevelt gave the unit what's called a President Unit Citation for the first time for having 10,000 tons a day. And I left always 25,000 or so a day. Tons. And it's something. Each base had its own base. And there, in the early part, way back by Imphal, we thought the Japanese were going to come up where some of those bases were at Imphal. Our boys were wearing their 45 holsters, their carbines, and they wouldn't even go to the trees I'd take them with.
Now the hump, how far is it across the hump?
Well, I know more about it by flying time. It's about a 4-hour flight, and I'd say that's about 1,200 miles. Anyhow,
What was our loss rate, the Japanese?
well, I lost our planes, as I say, a war of attrition. I read some, we lost over 1,000 planes that were shot out. And then we had an air rescue squadron that would look for our boys trying to walk out and drop them supplies. They were among the headhunters. They were among the headhunters.
Himalaya is not a good place to be shot down.
No, and I was forced to, I thought I was going to have to jump 2 or 3 times, but the Himalayas, those headhunters, I guess I took it out. I did have that. All the time. My baby would carry it. She said it was too morbid. I had a picture of 3 heads laying on the ground. But anyhow, that was a hump, and that's how I knew it.
Whose heads were they? Were they?
Well, some of Burma, some of those natives had nothing there, but some of the natives. But that's a saga of the war that's never been given proper credit.
Why the hump? Why were they flying over the hump?
Okay, Roosevelt needed to help Chiang Kai-shek get supplies over to help fight the Japanese. And he dreamed it up, and he drummed it up, and he got it started. And of course the first ones over there were Flying Tigers. They were just under General Chennault, but they were not, they had to have gasoline even to keep those planes going in the early part. They were really something.
And they were using the B-20?
Well, they had converted B-24, but they called those 109, but 347 was the original workhorse, but it was the best they ever had in the Air Force. It nearly fly by itself, but it couldn't go very high. You've seen these C-47s, they call them, the British call them Dakotas. Later we had the big C-54s like you've seen when Ford go these big planes we have now. And the C-46 was an old cargo train. It was a big ship.
So they could make the whole trip without refueling?
That's right. No, because they wanted to, they hadn't enough to refuel, or wasn't important taking gas over, they're going to hold it back.
Yeah.
And then over Kunming was lots of bad weather, lots of times, and it would fog up, 500 feet or more. More than that, but on the radio you could hear these pilots up there, and they'd lower them every 500 feet to let them come in, and when they approached the land, and occasionally you hear some old boy, I'm out of gas, and I'm heading, put a heading somewhere, and his plane going, he'd have to bail out. General George came over one time, head of the Air Transport Command, he was a major general. He got in one of these deals over Kunming. The rank doesn't mean anything, he stopped up there trying to get out, And they finally talked him down. It took him a long time. 500 feet, they'd make you hold, fall. Finally got him down. They had an old bamboo tower where they directed traffic, AT, like air transport. They had no bamboo ladder. Old General George got out personally and climbed that ladder. Said, I'll make this sergeant to talk me down. Told him how to get in. He said, and he decorated him. Gave him some medal. So that's where it was.
And your duties was mainly inspector of the
Inspector
different bases.
General, and I carried out any investigation the General wanted done. I was responsible for no one but the General and perhaps the Chief of Staff. And I was feared but liked, and had lots of friends.
And General Stilwell was a theater commander?
He was theater commander.
You ever meet him?
I've seen him, I never met him. I'm Lord Mountbatten. I met Stoudemire, and I saw my Lord Mountbatten. I met Madam Shankarshek, had her sign my short snort. How you sign the bill with all the famous names on it. I still have it on my dresser.
Would you just give me your reflections on Flying the Hump, CBI? You said it hasn't been recognized for what they did.
No, it hasn't been recognized. In fact, they're unsung heroes. Now, and we had a tough general, General Harding, Tom Harding. He was a B-25 pilot. He was a friend of C.R. Smith, who was president of American Airlines, and he also deputy Air Transport Command. He was made a general. And the weather was terrible over there. You see these great big white cumulus clouds that you see sometimes, and they just keep going and going and going. You don't dare fly through them and try to find a hole. If you get in, there's all kinds of trouble. Harding one day, I told him, he had B-25 up the valley there, and he said, I'm going to fly this. And boy, he flew that. He won't fly it at night. He flew it at night. It was beautiful moonlight night, no star or nothing. He came back and issued an order, the hump will never close. In other words, you boys are going to fly rain, snow, sleet, ice. And they did. Kept it going. I got the order. And the food got better. Of course, we all had those sea rations and stuff. Finally got a bottle of whiskey a month. And we'd take our whiskey and, we finally got a case of beer. The British like hot beer, and we'd trade our beer for one of their scotch. They had good scotch. And then the smartest people in the world are soldiers, and those crew chiefs would take a case of beer in the back end of the plane, fly up 40,000 feet, 30,000 feet to Kunming and be ice cold, and they got back and they got their ice beer that way. You can't beat that. You still do it. Smartest thing in the world. I'm telling you everything, first class. Well, anyhow, we haven't got on Roy Turner. You hungry?
Yeah.
Back down.
Okay. You were reflecting on the importance of the hump.
Well, it was a lifeline to China. And at that time, China was not communistic, and they were on our side against the Japanese. Now, that's the criteria to use to make a judgment. It's just as simple as that. It was a lifeline to China gasoline. Later, as the Japanese were pushed on to lower, it wasn't as hazardous to fly the tall Himalayas.
How many men were in the CBI?
I can't answer that question. Oh, there wasn't over 50,000 in the whole lot.
I don't want to show my ignorance, but I'm not that familiar with the CBI
Well, I'm not
area.
familiar with the total.
Yeah. Because I know basically they flew supplies into China, but that's all that I know.
Well, you had other deals. You had the glider outfits, and you had some that did more. Well, like up the Burma Road, Lido, that Lido Hospital there in Michigan. That's where famous doctor, gosh, what's his name? Seagraves. Remember, he had those little native nurses, Burmese nurses, and they were up there. They were still up there where they did the line fighting against the Japs. The ground troops were in there. Michigan was a famous place. And he had this famous, he was a Burma surgeon. You've seen the book, Dr. Seagraves.
How long were you in the CBI area?
26 months.
26 months.
I was fortunate. I got the dysentery that killed you in World War I, but now they had these drugs, this imetine hydrochloride, that I was in the hospital at Calcutta for 10 days or 2 weeks. And I was over in China, and I got a TWX. It'd test your stool sometime, however it was. I got a TWX report to the nearest hospital. Well, hell, I had enough sense to come home. I mean, I got on the plane, came back to we were at Hastings in Calcutta. We were on the Hastings Mill there on the Hoogla River. And the thing you need to remember, that very few people remember, that when you're in China, China is terribly unsanitary. The biggest commodity on earth, the cheapest commodity, is human life. Likewise in India, the cheapest commodity is human life. In Calcutta, the wagon go down the street every morning and pick up the bodies of people who died on the streets, and they take them down to the burning ghats and literally burn them. If you ever see the Taj Mahal, right behind the Taj Mahal is this river. I think it's the Ganges, I can't remember. But they throw the dead babies in there, and the big old turtles come up and get them and devour them. And it's all right there. Over in China, if a fella fell down, and these big old chow dogs, every time I see a chow dog, I cringe. They'll eat you too. Another thing in China, if you help some citizen on the street and try to help him, and he should die, you inherit all his relatives. You have to support them. And then they had another deal over there. Had these native Chinese working on these airways. Our first part was they built the big air runways at Chim-2 out of these old flint round rocks you and I used to find in creeks. Only get truckloads of them, and make runways out of them and crush them. And they had these big old rollers that you've seen used to roll tennis courts on. They're great big. Take 250 of them to pull that roller by an iron chain, and if one of the coolies stumbled, you think they stopped? They just rolled on over him. And then they have a superstition there, those natives, if they can, the devil's chasing them, and they'll run out in front of the plane, and so that plane will get the devil. Sometimes those propellers would get the coolie. Then they had another game they'd play in the airplane, like you and I'd gamble 2 fingers or one, kind of like a shell game. If you lost, they'd throw you out the plane. Now those aren't, they're true stories, and I came home World War II telling this. They thought I'd lost my marbles, but they're still a true story. Well, anyhow, go on, sir.
Okay, were you in the CBI area when the war ended?
Yes, sir. I was in Karachi when the first bomb dropped. And they had a big celebration. I remember they had it in the field house, or they had a song and dance deal on the stage, and everybody was cheering and so forth. So I recall, I think I got up and did a jig or something, I don't remember. But anyhow, I went on to China, and I was there when it was over and they had surrendered in the second bomb. They surrendered soon after that. And I remember we got a TWX, you know what they are, telegram, over the wire. It said, the undersigned assumes command of the China-Burma Theater. MacArthur. Oh, he didn't let any grass grow under his feet. That's the way he was. I was there, I was a captain, I was a colonel, I had a major as a flight surgeon, and a young brigadier general over me. Had 2 sergeants out of this plane. I had your Army musette bag that you're familiar with, green bag. I was the only SB there that had any whiskey, and I pulled that out. Got the sergeants, and all of us, we all had about a jig. We just emptied that, whatever it was, a couple of jigger apiece, and that was it. That was our celebration. Now you asked me the question, I answered it truthfully. And another thing, this really bugged me. Up to that time, the hump, as I told you, had been open 24 hours a day, and the planes flew every night or day, and no one stopped them. Well, after this wire came surrendering, the Japanese surrendered, they sent us TWX to us up in Kunming. No more flying, night flying. Well, I was on this plane, I wanted to get to Calcutta. I took the last night plane from Kunming, China, to Calcutta. And I just knew that thing was going down. You know, I was sweating it out. The last one, and I was on it. After that, it was all daylight. But that's the truth. Then one day I went out to one of these great big C-54 planes here at the last, the big ones. A young kid jumping around, getting up on the wings, testing the gasoline tank, this and that, jumping around. And I could go on any plane. I was going back, I think, to Calcutta. I said, young man, now, where's the pilot? He says, I'm the pilot. He was one of those last flying sergeants. I never shall forget it. Of course, the young kids were not kids. See, they use the young ones, as you know, are more daring. You get an older person, he'll think out the cause and cause and effect. Well, you can't do that in wartime. They want the young ones who do the stuff now and then they think about it later. And that's the reason the young kids are so wonderful in war. It's a shame, but that's the way it is. Well, people don't think of those things.
How long do you stay in the area after the war?
Well, sir, I was due to be rotated, and I left first part of September. My replacement had already come. I left, but didn't get to go into Shanghai or those areas of China. I was always back in the hinterland. And General Tunner had a home there on this place. He had a nice quarter, two-story old British. Had his own mess over there, which I belonged to and helped pay for. And he gave a little party for me that evening. Before that, though, I'd gone to China and made an inspection, and there was a colonel over there that he wasn't promoted, a lieutenant colonel. And this colonel asked me, Inspector General, to help him get promoted. He said that Tunner blamed me for some VIPs came by and inspected our base, and it wasn't up to par when it really was, so forth. And I said, well, I'll talk to the general about it. Well, anyhow, they gave this party for me, and sat on the divan with the general. And Tony Martin was our sergeant in our outfit. I had Tony Martin sing to me. I couldn't buy his bride. And he was a singer and sang my farewell dinner there. And then I kept my word, and I said, Joe, explain this situation about Colonel so-and-so over in China. You're holding up his promotion. Well, he said so. And I said, now, sir, I investigated that, and that's not fact. And I said, I wish you'd reconsider it. He said, I'll look into it. And he did. You know, the old boy got promotion. I learned later. Last special act I did. Helped that poor joker. Mm-hmm. Well, I've done enough bragging on myself.
So when did you return to the States?
I returned in first part of September.
At 45?
Yes, sir. And then, we can lead into this other. I came home. I got down, I came home with okay, two different deals. I came into Washington, and I'm going to be separated from the service at Andrews Air Base where the president wasn't fly in and out. And I had enough pulled in. I had a staff car pick me up at the old Raleigh Hotel at a certain time. Got up early. Had on my uniform and all that stuff. I got out that air base early. Got in the middle of this separation place. Sergeant saw me and says, what on earth, Colonel, are you doing out here this early? He says, these colonels never come out here this early. I said, young man, I want to get out. They offered me a 45-day recreation deal in Florida. I'd had this maybe dysentery stuff. I said, no, I've had enough of that business. I just want to get out of this thing honorably. And they said, well, we recommend you for a majority in the regular Army or Air Force, I don't know. I'll go back in reserve, which I did. But then, I got a flight to Houston, Texas with a friend of mine, and we flew into Houston. He lived there. His name was, anyhow, Monroe. And he had some folks there, and he had a baby he'd never seen, and his wife met him at the airport, and then a big reunion. I came on home, and I caught the train. On the train, I remember seeing Bob Kerr on there. I didn't know him personally then, walking up and down the aisle, he was on his way. I got into Dallas, and in those days, I recall, the interurban went from Dallas to Denison, and I took the interurban to Denison and called my mother from Durant. She came and got me. That's how I got home. And then soon after that, one of my friends, Major Smith, whom I promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, he was in the hospital over at this Navy hospital in Little Rock, I think. He called and was going to come to see me in Durant. He had no idea how far it was. But I got over to Durant, and I didn't know what time he was going to arrive. So I went down to the Bryan Hotel. It's an old landmark there in Durant now. And there was old Colonel Theodore Smith. Jumped out and surprised me, and we went to Denison and everything, had a couple of beers or something. Came home that night and got home about 2 o'clock in the morning. My dear little mother was sitting on the front steps waiting for me and nearly crying in tears. I said, well, Mother, what on earth? You know I'm responsible. Yes, but I'm worried about you. I said, Mother, if I can go to China and back and go through the war all by myself, I can go down here to Denison, Texas. And that's the truth. Boy, the thing you do. Okay, then I came back and got this job in Washington with the Veterans Administration for a few months in their inspection department, since I'd had this experience. And I decided I wasn't too happy, and I decided I wanted to go to law school. I already had a master's. So I came back here and used my $90 GI, and went into the OU Law School in my second term in January. See, that job in September got maternal leave in January. So I got into law school there, and I met a lot of the young veterans. I got along with them, and I wasn't stuck up. And I was interested in politics, and somebody told me about Roy Turner. Before this, years ago, I was president of the Young Voters for President Roosevelt under Franklin D. Roosevelt Jr. I have letterheads today for that. My name had gotten around in the Young Democrats. And I was recommending Roy Turner, and he sent word to me some way, and I went to see him, and he was running for governor. So I said, if I can get out of school without getting a bunch of F's on my record, well, I was on your campaign. So I was able to withdraw from the law school. And on my record, it's just W's, not D's or F's, shows withdrew. And that's when I started barnstorming for me. I just barnstormed. I went to his opening announcement itself, and I have a picture here I'll give you of Turner's making his first announcement. And I worked with Mr. McNeil. He was his advisor. And,
now, what did you do when you were barnstorming?
We just barnstormed aside. We'd worked in certain areas of the country. We'd just drive into town, like you'd go into Bennington or Hugo and set up at the bank or some corner and play your old Red Wing music or silver guitar rag. Get drum up some of that hurdy-gurdy music, you know, and then you get up and instead of selling patent medicine, we'd get up and make a speech for Roy Turner.
What year was this?
Well, it was in 46.
Did
He
you?
took office 1st of January 47. And then I told you about in the fall, and I have a picture. I didn't bring it of a young guy like old George Stipe was in one of my speaking units over here in the Senate for a year. Famous lawyer.
Did you have a standard speech, or did you pattern at
I had mostly a pattern speech. No, he talked about Roy Turner, how he used to work for the packing company, and then he was later president of the school board here in Oklahoma City for 2 terms or so, and just gave his line barn over here at Kendrick. just a little about him and what he believed in, and about his experience in the cattle industry. He had this big farm and ranch at Hereford Heaven about sulfur, and how they made a big joke about he sold that sterile bull for some $99,000 or $50,000. And I said, yes, that's all true, but Turner's a man of his word, and he gave him back his money. And things like that, and just went on. But when he won, I still, of course, wasn't married then, and I told my mother I was going to look for a job. I'd get a job. And I still had some money. My mother, I sent her allotment to her all during the war. Now, this is something. When I came home, she could spend it, hers. My mother wasn't well off, but she had enough to eat in a nice home. When I came home, I said, Mother, did you get along all right on money? Yeah, did fine. I said, what'd you do? I saved every dollar up to $7,500 down here, yours. Now imagine that. Isn't that wonderful? Anyhow, I got a job down here at the wholesale section of the Ford Motor Company, where the branch office, where they train supervisors to ultimately be dealers, or to at least supervise on the dealers and go out and check them out and see if they're keeping everything up to par. Well, I'd gone to a school over there for about 6 weeks, and that cost them some money. And Turner, elect, had called my mother, and he didn't know her personally. He said, Mrs. McIntire, where's Forest? What, don't you know? No. He just dropped out. Well, she said, last I heard of him, working with the Ford Motor Company. He said, I want to get hold of him. We said, that's fine. He got hold of me and offered to me. He said, now, first I want you to come with me, and I want you to set up my office and stuff. He said, you know how to do it. For governor, I called him Mr. Turner. I said, I'm tied up here. I came over here in good faith, and I'm a man of my word. Well, he says, if I could get you out of this with the Ford Motor Company without prejudice against me, would you do it? I said, yes, sir, I would, but I'm not going in there and beg off. So what? I'll keep my word. Well, he called the manager. You know, the new governor called a manager down here. He's going to try to cooperate, don't you think? So they were glad to let me go. And then what happened right after that, Governor Turner and McNeil was his political advisor, H.J. McNeil. They hooped and hondered off out to Las Vegas and leave me down here at the Commerce Exchange. They had McNeil had an office, and so I said, you, McIntire, you get the mail and you sort it and start answering it. I must have thought a whole lot of them there, anyhow. I had to sort those letters and answer them. I'd write one of the letters you can't get mad at. We appreciate having the benefit of your opinion, and we thank you so much, and so forth. Couldn't get mad. And I started doing that. Then he said, now, once you set up the governor's office, I'll pick my personal secretary and my attorney. We already have Mr. Neal. You get all the rest of them. Well, I'll take back one except Till John, the press secretary. If I get the rest of them, I'd get the PBX, the secretary, the receptionist, all about it, and the legal secretary, and I did all that. But the reason I did it, Joe, and you remember this, I set up an office like an office message center of the Army. Everything came in was logged in. Had a suspense file over here to be sure it was answered within a certain time. Therefore, we didn't miss answering any letters unless it was just totally junk. And that experience helped me all my life. And that likewise leads into helping me, as I said before, when I took the job with the Board of Regents. I wasn't afraid of it. I'd made investigations. I'd been in these tight spots. Have I run out your record?
Nope.
Well, sir, that's just about it.
What kind of man was Roy Turner?
I had these down. Just a little. I'll keep the card. Governor Roy J. Turner was a great governor. He was kind and gentle, but could be firm as anyone when necessary. It was a real privilege to have worked with him as executive secretary during his 4-year term. It cost him personal money to be governor, course, he was a millionaire, but he was a humble man. The late gone. The late Governor Turner was a close friend of the late President Harry Truman. Governor Turner sent Governor Turner arranged for Jim Arrington and myself to take a governor-elect, Johnson Murray. Now that's the period between November, you were not inaugurated until January, to the White House to see President Truman. I was concerned as to what President Truman might, I was concerned as to what comment President Truman might make with reference to Alfalfa Bill, whom everybody knows was a very controversial person. Johnston Murray's father. The President said that he knew Bill Murray and bragged on him, so the conference went smoothly, to much to my relief. I didn't know whether to say I know the old SOB or daddy or not, but I was worried about that. Now I'm in the Oval Office. Well, Turner made all arrangements. He had this entree with President Truman, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So I was off the hook, boy, and went on over to the Mayflower. Had a suite. I wasn't paying for it. Turner would help me pay for that. And you know, that night, Johnson Murray he liked to kind of honk-talk a little. And he and Jim Arrington go out to the famous Shoreham Hotel to a big dance party and cut up and nearly make Life magazine, you know. And I thought, boy, I really caused trouble. But Tom Steed and I, Congressman Tom Steed and I were close friends. We were in India together, and he came down and we had our dinner a la carte in the suite that I had. As I said before, Turner, I couldn't live on state expense, and he had finances. So, Bill Murray, likewise, Johnson Murray's friend, Bill Dunges was with him. But we left on a Sunday morning. We were going home, and we were going through the lobby. I might add beforehand that Johnson Murray didn't have any money. He had $25 in his pocket when he left Oklahoma City. And we were walking through the lobby on Sunday morning to catch a cab to go to the airport. Well, he says, first I got to buy Willie a present. Well, I said, there's nothing open on Sunday here. There's a drugstore here. So I went in there and bought Willie Murray a $25 green leather little travel clock, you know, that folds up. So that's what he gave Willie with my money. It was my money, it wasn't Turner's money. And I bought that. So that's okay. In 1948 election, Mr. Truman was making famous whistle stops all over the country and would talk off to the rear end of the observation car. And that was when everybody thought he didn't have a chance to win, and Mr. Dewey was going to win, which Kaltenborn announced later wrongly that night before. Well, Truman ran out of money. Well, Turner was a big Democrat and thought about Truman, and he dug up $38,000. That's a lot of cash in those days. And gave it to Truman to finance that train. And then that's what kept it going. But they've tried to get it back to the Democratic Party, some of it, and I'm sure Turner didn't get it all back. And they'd take different leaders around here who could afford $1,000, and they'd go to Marietta or Ardmore and get on this train and ride with the president up here in his private car or train. And as you know, I learned later that by the president, he had a Secret Service man. He checks everybody, and you give your name, and then Mr. So-and-so, Riley, whoever head of the Secret Service, would say, Mr. President, Mr. So-and-so. Well, Dan Tanksley, I guess I shouldn't use his name, a contractor here, gave his $1,000. And he got down there and was so excited when the guy asked his name to introduce him to the president. He couldn't give his own name. He just blank. He couldn't remember. So anyhow, that's a little sidelight. You can strike that for the record, but anyhow, there's some of the things that happened. But later, as mail came over my desk, all the mail came over, and I hope all of it by any means, if anything obviously personal, and my secretary wouldn't dare, and I hope, especially a White House letter, and one day this girl, my secretary was Ginger Rogers, and she inadvertently opened this, and I was very unhappy about it, and of course I had to read it. And it was just a small, perfunctory letter that some White House secretary had written, thanking me and all this stuff. Oh, about an inch and a half wide long. But out the bottom, Harry Truman, Truman in longhand, on writing, wrote the rest of that page, turned the whole page over, wrote all on the back, thanking Roy Turner and how much he'd done for him. And I apologized to the governor inadvertently, hoping he didn't mind after he saw the letter. It was very complimentary. And he was president of what you call the National Truman Barclay Clubs over the whole country. And they had a big dinner, and I have a picture I can give you, of the Truman Barclay banquet just before the inauguration. And Mr. Truman and Governor Turner presided as president, chairman of that Truman Barclay Club. Well, Governor Turner told me, now, Forrest, you take care of Betty and don't let anything happen to her. Well, she was a good-looking little 16-year-old gal, and we were all in tux, and she was in a little evening dress. I wasn't going to let any wolves get her, and I watched her. We were sitting out there. We're in this picture. And Betty says, Forrest, I've got to meet the President of the United States. After all, Daddy was head of his Truman Barclay Club. And I said, well, let's see what we can do. Well, I got up and went over to Mr. Riley. I'd met him, head of the Secret Service there. Now, he knew I wasn't a fashion. I said, I've got Governor Turner's daughter here. He's presiding, as you know, yet. Well, he says, I think she ought to get to meet the President. Well, I said, what should I do, sir? He says, you bring her right up here by me. When they start coming down the head table, the President comes first, and I'll be with him. And you stand right here, and I'll stop. And I introduced Betty Turner to the President of the United States and stopped the President. You just don't do that. So those are some of the little side things that I've seen the bright lights.
The campaign of 1946 was quite bitter.
Yes.
Both especially in the Democratic primary. You say you were barnstorming for Turner. Did you went through the whole campaign process?
Sir, yeah, the big opponent then. Now we don't want to get mixed up later on. The Turner raced for this Bob McCurry for Senate.
Senate, right?
But the big opponent for Turner was H.C. Jones, who was had been chairman of the Internal Revenue Service here. And I'd make a speech about him, you know, whoever heard of a money collector being elected office. That's kind of rough, you know. Not just that anger we came from Carnegie. But those were the two big. What Dixie Gilmer, I think, was in that deal from Tulsa. Now Dixie Gilmer is the one, and he was runner-up, as I recall. Mm-hmm. He was a lawyer over there, and he was a capable individual, especially for tearing down people. And he's the one, you know, that caused Dr. Bennett so much trouble. I left. I was gone during the war. Dr. Bennett was filed on for several charges, perhaps criminal, for using the state textbook commission to adopt the books that he wrote. Supposed to make so many thousand. Now that was all done while I was in the Army. That's all the second half with me. But John Mook, my friend for years later, was his attorney. And it broke Dr. Bennett. He had to take all his cash out of his life insurance to pay for his attorney. Well now, sir, you have the floor.
I'd like to ask of what kind of person General Keyes was.
W.S. Key?
W.S. Key.
Well, sir, that's a very good question. General Key, my good friend Henry G. Bennett, kind of became crossed up. Friends of Dr. Bennett had collected money for Dr. Bennett to run for governor. He was always taunting with the idea to run for governor one day, or a potential threat. Well, Holloway, and I think Roy Turner was in it, collected money, $2,500 a head. They got some money for Bennett's campaign. Well, what they did with it, which was wrong, Governor Holloway did it, took that money and gave it to Red Phillips' campaign. It was Red Phillips that beat W.S. Key. And Lee Thompson was W.S. Key's aide-de-camp in close confinement. So I thought perhaps when I got in the military, they knew I'd been a friend of Bennett, but General Key'd kind of wouldn't treat me too nice. But General Key was a very foster, strong man. He didn't butt around. He buzzed his voice, it buzzed. But he had to accept me because I wanted to get back to 45th, and he had to prove my transfer. At that time, I was still upset. I lost my wife, and I was very depressed and wanted to be among friends and baby. And so they accepted my transfer from Palatial to Fort Crockett, Texas, to Abilene. And I was well received, but I had to win my own spurs, and they were treated. And Lee and I became very good friends, and he was just dying in the world of General Key. And as I said, General Key promoted me to captain to a major up at Fort Devon. But I was single and I had a car, and I drove General Key from Abilene. He was a big mason. He was Inspector General in the Masonic State. So I drove him, I think a couple times to Oklahoma City. I took him one time by Sherman and Durant and Callister's big Masonic town, and up to here. So I was close enough to him where he would want to be around me and do favors for him. But he was a wonderful person and very positive. But most of your big men are humble and gentle underneath. You just watch that through life. Now the arbitrary ones who are real SOBs, they're the one you want to watch. But your big men are kind and humble, even though they have all the power in the world. I've learned that through life, and always go to the top.
Well, I was, during the Turner administration, he promoted quite a bit of social welfare reform by helping mental institutions, getting them more money, besides promoting education, and of course his highway program.
That's correct, sir. I remember more vividly first the highway business. He straightened that out and had a commissioner from each congressional district. He made 8 congressional highway districts. And then, of course, from then on, he was interested in the Turner Turnpike. He had a difficult time with that because the town of Sapulpa and Stroud and Chandler all fought him. They thought that would ruin their town. I went with Governor Turner several times to Washington. In fact, I'd get so tired sometime, I'd say, Governor, somebody's got to go back and run the office. And I'd leave. Couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand it, staying up all night and no sleep during the daytime. And he'd have open house in his suite. I didn't, and he'd hire a regular bartender to come in and do the cocktails for the visitors. Turner didn't get drunk, but he entertained that way. And he had one occasionally some night the room wouldn't be cleaned up at night. And the first thing in the morning, he kept standing to see an empty whiskey bottle or old cocktail glasses. I'd have to call down the stairs and get some fellow to come up and clean it all up. Now, those are some of the side issues. But back to General Key, I saw him later after the war. And like I told you, in command at Fort Devens, he was treated terribly by the brass out of 3rd Army. I'm surprised the general, I don't think we named him it. Treat him that way. Now Ray McLean, of course, mixed up in this, and Ray was a wonderful officer, came to be the highest ranking civilian soldier. He's lieutenant general, and recently I went to, the last 6 months I flew to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where they honored him, put him in the Hall of Fame there, a National Guard officer. And then I used to go to the horse races out of Boston with John McLean. I was a young major. He was brigadier general, and John Church was a colonel. John Church later became Major General John Church. And they'd come over on Saturday afternoon. Most of the time I'd catch Saturday. And they'd get me off duty, and I'd take them over to the races, and I'd be their aide de camp, and bottle washer, and errand boy, and they liked that, and they kept coming back to me. And I'd do it, But it was a shame that General Key, he would have made a good governor. He'd made a positive governor. He'd have been not as radical as old Alfalfa Bill. But everybody in Oklahoma would go to bed at night and know who was governor. Like they did with Bill Murray, and they could spell his name. I remember the toll road fight at Durant. I led the Durant, and he called out the guard to open that toll road. And I went down there one day, and there's a great big black car. And Ms. Murray was in the car. And I might add that she was the most gracious, charming lady. How on earth he ever caught her, I'll never know. And if you ever been in the mansion over there, he had a room up there in the second floor. And the walls of that room, not much bigger than this, a little more, was all covered with tobacco juice. And he wore long handle underwear even in the summertime. He'd wear these white suits with his underwear sticking out about 2 inches. And he'd chew tobacco and some of that drip on his white coat. Now I'm giving the unabridged version. And I used to go down to the mansion with Henry Bennett, Dr. Bennett, and he used the convicts for help. And I didn't know him personally by no means, but I'd see him. Bennett would talk to him. First, Bennett was worried about Bill Murray being governor and would try to fire him. He did do some things, but Bennett's such an operator, he went down to Tishomingo and cornered him in his little house, and they got kind of friendly. And Bennett was such a smart guy, he could talk about any subject. And Bill Murray kind of got to liking him. He's telling you how it was. And you know the old story, which everybody knows, he had in this chair, like you're the governor, and this was the visitor, he'd have this chair changed to this desk. I couldn't move, you wouldn't get any closer, I couldn't get any closer to you.
You say you went down to the bridge where they had the...
I just went down there as a boy out of Durant observing. I just wanted to see it.
What was your...
They had the soldiers marching, and they just took over that bridge. National Guard called out, and he opened it. It was a toll road bridge. They had history. But I remember, though, they had this big black car. I don't guess it was as big a limousine they have today, but it was kind of a limousine, and I remember saying Mrs. Murray, and I asked inquired who the lady was, said Mrs. Murray. But I'll never forget it.
Did you see Governor Murray down there?
I don't recall that part of it. I was so impressed with her. Tell it like it is. Oh, I asked the notes, okay. Another thing Governor Turner did, he changed the process of being president of the State Board of Agriculture. They elected them. Joe Scott would run for office. I think they call it commissioner now, or whatever, president of the Board of Agriculture. Well, Turner didn't like that, and of course I think Turner and Scott kind of feuded. So Turner got the legislature to make that an appointive office of the governor. But also you want to remember, previous to this, Joe Scott was a member of the A&M Board of Regents by being president of the Board of Agriculture. Was an ex officio member, but even ex officio you have a vote. But old Joe being so dominant, he'd get that board to come down there and meet in his office at the Capitol. Bennett would have to come down. It was convenient to Colonel Stewart because he lived here and like that, and they'd meet there. Well, Bennett got this done, and also in this intervening period, or just before this, in '45, the people passed this constitutional amendment making the Board of Regents of A&M colleges constitutional with staggered terms for 8 years or 9, whatever it is, I don't know. It had to be confirmed by the Senate. And once they got in there, unless they did some heinous crime, they didn't get impeached. And they were independent of the governor as long as they had a majority. But anyhow, and Governor Turner won this, and he appointed Harold Hutton as the first ex officio member. But for a while, Joe Scott wouldn't go to meetings anymore, even though he was ex officio member, until they changed the law. He got mad and wouldn't go. So he did do that, but that was one of the fallacies of this constitutional board, which people are just now being abrogated. The protection is. For this first time now, we've had a governor elected twice. He had 8 years. Well, a governor in 8 years can control any board. When I was there, I always had 5 old members, constitutional members. If I got along with that 5, I knew I could kind of give me time to get to know the new members. So that's the point very seldom mentioned. And
How many different governors did you serve under?
well, of course, the new Governor Turner, obviously. Murray, Gary, Howard Edmondson, and name some more. Nye. And there's 6. I had 6.
Bill.
Oh, Bellman. Bellman's one who gave me a bad time. And by the way, I'll forgive him because I think he's a little more stable.
Could you say you knew Murray and Phillips?
Johnson Murray, sir.
Johnson
I have some pictures I'll give you. By the way, I found these. I'll just throw in for you. Here's old Bill Murray and Johnson at his inauguration. His old daddy's up there. You can have them in the Murray file.
Thank you. What kind of, would you just give a short description of each of the governors? Like, did you say Phillips that you knew?
I know I didn't know no until
Okay.
personally, no way.
What about Johnston Murray?
Well, I'll tell you about Johnston. I first knew him, Governor Turner made him Secretary of the School Land Commission. The governor is presiding, then you have the House member, you have the other member like Secretary of State and Auditor and the like. A governor doesn't get to pick the secretary per se, but he usually has enough influence to get him named. Johnson Murray was named Secretary of the School Land Commission, which is a multi-million-dollar outfit. And first thing I knew, you saw some postcards with Johnson County and Murray County on the postcard. That meant Johnson Murray. Then Johnson would come see me, and I told Governor Turner that Johnson wanted me to support him. He said, well, now, first, I can't get involved in that, I know, but he said, if you do what you want to do, just don't get me involved. I said, okay, sir. So I helped proofread his speeches, helped correct the English in some cases. It wasn't that bad. And I was very close to him. And as I told you, I took him to meet Mr. Truman. And as are in some of these clippings you'll see, I'm giving you, I was supposed to be appointed on the State Tax Commission, leaving the governor's office. Well, it happened Mr. Lineker was kin to Mr. Dunges, and Dunges furnished all the money for Mr. Murray. So that outranked me. There I was hanging on with nothing, so to speak. Otis Sullivan, the political writer, was a friend of mine. And Otis put my big article on the front page of Oklahoma, and my picture says McIntire didn't get to be commissioner. I said, Otis, why on earth? I got more publicity than if I'd gotten. You know, he says, I didn't do that byline. He says, some of that bunch down in Oklahoma did that. Well, my feelings was hurt. Here I was kind of hanging, and I lived out on 23rd Street in Villa. I had a duplex. I wasn't married, all by myself. I had a nice little apartment. And I was kind of embarrassed, and I just stayed home a few days. And I heard Johnson got upset because he told everybody he was going to appoint me, and then I'd taken him to Washington and done everything for him. And 2 senators came to see me, and so the governor's upset, and would you take an appointment on the State Industrial Commission? Well, I said, I can't even spell State Industrial Commission. And he said, well, he says, I said, do you mean lawyer? Well, he said, layman can serve. I said, well, I have a master's degree, but I do not have a law degree. But I said, since I'm kind of embarrassed, I said, tell you what to do. I can't, in no position to make any demands on the governor, no way. But if he wants to do this, since I've been embarrassed, and I've been in the house 3 days, I think, if he'll put it on the 11 o'clock broadcast to WKY that he announced the appointment of Forest McIntire as a member of the State Industrial Commission, I'll accept it. The next day at 11 o'clock it was on the news. It's true. Well, I went on out to the commission, sworn in, and started, and conscience got to hurting me. So I went on up and thanked Johnson. And that's how I got on there. And I stayed there nearly 2 years. I had very few cases of mine turned over by the Supreme Court. Most of the process in the industrial court is question of fact, or question of facts. Very little law. And I'd hear the cases out and the doctor's complaint, his complaint, and most of the time, if the subject were subjective complaints or objective, you knew the difference. But we had a gentleman on there, I guess I shouldn't be mentioning names on this, but it was in the paper. We had some young boys on there, and they were great. Donovan was a Navy veteran, I was a veteran, and Paul Long was a veteran. We weren't just kids. And Hendon was an old lawyer from Shawnee. You may want to strike the name. From Shawnee, and he was in cahoots with some of these attorneys. Of course, statutes run. And we knew he'd get split and kicked back some way. But then we'd have to call an appeal in bank, where a majority of the court would sit and hear the appeal. Well, Hendon would give a big award on this part. Even with the appeal, you never would cut it down enough to where it should be. So I went to see Governor Murray. And I said, now, Governor, I want to tell you something. I'm on this commission. We've got a guy on here that's not doing right. He's run out. We're about through. And I said, we're in no position to threaten you, but if he doesn't leave, 2 or 3 of us are going to leave. We're just not going to put up with it. And even Oklahoma, after Hendon did resign, he fired his own chairman. Even the Oklahoman editorialized, and I put my name in there, and there are 3 of us names in there for leading that commission.
What about Raymond Gary?
Raymond, I knew him more as a senator. He was a master politician. He believed in the victor belongs to spoils. I think his personal integrity was unimpeachable. Raymond, I first knew Raymond, he and I were students at Southeastern State Teachers College in 30th summer 32. He was county superintendent of Marshall County. Raymond was just, as you know, they kidded him about his English, but that was negligible. But he believed in, I'd say he was I don't want to call him a yellow dog, but he was a staunch Democrat. And I'm feel sorry for him. He's been sick. He's in the hospital now with a cardiac arrest or whatever it is. But I've had several notes from him through the years, and I have great respect for him. And I even knew David Hall. I have a picture I'm going to give to Bill. If there ever was a Grover Whalen, it was David Hall, without including financial irresponsibility. I know names. I know some of the appointees that even had to pay a telephone bill. I won't mention any names. But he was personable.
What about Edmondson?
All right, that's a good one. I wasn't in on the prayer fire. I traveled over the state and I saw that coming. With a group of us, couples would meet up. A doctor's friend of ours, Nicholas Hills, and every Friday night or so, we'd always talk politics. And I came in off from my state travel, and I said, this fella, Howard Emerson's going somewhere. They wouldn't believe me, they poo-pooed. Wasn't 2 weeks till he's elected. I didn't have any entree with Howard Emerson. I knew he appointed Jack Cornelius as president of the State Board of Agriculture, and he was my elders. Being from southeastern Oklahoma, we had a lot of mutual friends. And I just won my own spur. Now, he appointed the president of the Board of Agriculture. I had mental blocks here, I think that's the name. But, no, I beg your pardon on that. That was Bennett. Howard Emerson was a big buddy of Leland Gorley, as you know, paper. And big buddy of Joe Cannon. He put Joe Cannon at head of the Highway Patrol. I want to tell you something funny, I'm on that. That's something that's going to be interesting reading. I would go up to Miami, Oklahoma on business to the college visit. And I don't mind telling you, since it's military, I'll take a social track, never over 2 at the most. And I'd go up to Bonita, Miami, well, it's just a little ways over to Seneca, Missouri, you know. And this was about the time when old Cannon was cracking down and trying to make the state dry. You remember all that? Y'all old enough to know that. So I went over to Seneca one time all by myself and got a truckload of whiskey. And as I come back from Seneca, there's a narrow blacktop road and there's a bridge, low brick creek down here. I could see over this hill, and I could see a 3-highway patrol down there. And I thought, oh my God, they got me to myself. Well, there wasn't anything I could do, but just go on. I went on down there, just nice, and slowed down and said, polite. A boy on a motorcycle had fallen, and it crashed there. And they were not stopping the cars. And he said, now you can go around this way, and I went around. I had this back in full of whiskey, and I could just see myself, McIntire, Board of Regents, picked up with a trunkload of whiskey. Now you talk about some of the deals. And then one time I was coming back from a meeting of the Board of Regents out at Colorado University. Had a new car, and it's still dry state. I was coming back from Guyman and got through Hardesty, and I was coming back to Bryan's Corner. It was a big open corner, 4-way. You could see miles either way. And I'd been driving pretty fast. Fortunately, there's an oil truck with a pipe in front of me, made me kind of slow down. And Hazel says, "Forrest, there's an airplane up there." Well, that's fine. I'd already slowed down a little. And I could see these Holstein cars, I call them, black and white, coming down that section line. I got up here to this corner. Boy, there was 3 cars. You'd have thought I was a bank robber. And they stopped me, and I'd already reached my pocket and got my driver's license. I told Hazel to shut up and let me do the talking. And I didn't park right where he wanted me to. He wanted me to pull up about 6 more feet trying to intimidate me. He did, and I handed him a driver's license and never said a word. He said, well, our airplane up there caught you going 70 or something. I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir, just whatever you say, officer. I served him to death, you know. And he said, well, but what I was afraid of, I had this whiskey under I had a pint of whiskey under this seat or Fiat. I didn't have much whiskey, just that. And I was kicking that out of that front seat, and when I stopped, it was rolling out on the floor. And I was kicking that, and my wife was like, and boy, I'm caught again. Gave me a warning ticket, and I bet I didn't go 20 miles an hour for the next 30. Now, these are some sad things that happened to me, and I know that's enough. We're diversity. You can add it to the strike what you don't want.
What about Bellman?
I think Mr. Bellman, personally, is personally honest, stubborn, has very little diplomacy. He's not a public speaker. But his words is bond. He's outgoing to the extent if he doesn't like you or doesn't like something, he'll tell you. Which I like. I like to know where he stands. He appointed a board member, a guy from Ada. It didn't turn out too well, and he was transferred to Texas. And I saw him in the hall. I knew he'd come out in the hall and he'd loved to walk to the mansion. It was one of his pride he'd walked off with. I caught him out in the hallway. I knew him. I said, Governor, David Howe, you can strike this up. He didn't do anything wrong. He's transferred. He said, I knew I made a mistake in that appointment. He wasn't a very good man. But he admitted it. He told me. But he sees me then now, but Miami, they gave a little deal. When I retired, I went up there and he and I sat together in the platform, and I have a picture of him with he and I. And Dale Creech was president of Northeastern. So we're on good terms, but I just told you.
What about Nye?
Nye is the greatest governor we've ever had to preside over this government. By preside, I mean that's it. He's fortunate, had multi-million dollars here during the oil boom. He had no problem. He's an excellent after-dinner speaker, very personal. He's not as good as Reagan on one-liners, but he does pretty good on one-liners. You cannot guess him. He served in public office 32 years. He's been a credit to the state. He hadn't gotten us in trouble. But this is the first adversity he's had with the farm industry going down, especially the oil industry. Now together on top the last 3 months, this worst flood in the history of the state. Now did I hurt him in what I said? I described him. I didn't say preside over the demise. I said he just presided.
Now you were on the connected with the State Agriculture Board.
Not very long on that, but
That was under Governor Marlin's administration.
no, that is under Joe Scott ran that. I was just trying to think who the governor was.
Well, that was 38 to 40.
That was 38 to 40.
No, that's Marlin and Phillips.
Probably Phillips. No, I was in McAllister in those days when Phillips was running. I had a friend who put up signs for Red Phillips at night, and I'd put up a sign for Gomer Smith at night. Statute of limitations run on all that stuff. I've given him part of this history. Now, here's a picture of Roy Turner. Here's a picture of Roy Turner and Secretary Agriculture Brannon, I think, and there's old Joe Jarbo from Tulsa. There was Turner he made his announcement speech down Sulphur that night. He was scared to death. He read it. He had a hard time even reading his own speeches, but he did. He got by.
KMA radio.
And there's Turner with one of this old Kirksey Nicks never did like governor. I don't know where I got that picture.
This is who, Turner?
Kirksey Nicks, remember he was on the Criminal Court of Appeals? Died here recently. And here's another picture of Turner. I think these are Bill Amos construction people. I just found that. And then you have this stuff on me. Now here's another Turner campaign, and you can go in them guys' office. I think that's some county commissioner. And here is just in Oklahoma in the tall green corn. All right. Now here's one bill you've seen where he to my good friend, Forest Executive Secretary Forest McIntire, every good wish, Roy Turner, and you have my biography. But here's one I want you to read that I am really proud of. I couldn't write my own obituary better than that one.
Oh, Carl Everett.
Let me read that in the record.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm really proud of this. This is from Carl Albert, former Speaker of the House, December 7, 1982. Mr. Forest McIntire and so forth. Dear Forest, I deeply appreciated your letter and attached tribute to Hickey McCaslin. You may remember Colonel McCaslin. He used to be postmaster. He was in the 45th. I was touched by your beautiful and articulate description of the bogey-bottomed friend of mine whose ribs were iron but whose heart was velvet. I haven't heard that before. I can honestly say I never had a better friend. I never knew a better man. May God bless his sacred memory. Forrest, I was also deeply touched by the hidden things your letter did not say, but so eloquently made clear to me. As I read it, I could feel the manifestation of those wonderful qualities of character which you have always been blessed. You have done far more and meant far more to your fellow man than all but a precious few. Thanks for the good life you have led, for the good deeds you have done. From my own standpoint, thanks above all for having been so long my faithful friend. You have done so many things that you have never demonstrated in the limelight, that I doubt that the whole story of the greatness of your life or your contributions to your fellow man can or will ever be fully told. I agree with your letter to the Oklahoman, pointing up the necessity of a military strength. Our foes need no moral grounds for their philosophy, but they respect the power which only military preparedness can furnish. Thank you, Forrest, for your kind words. Thanks for writing me. I appreciate it. Have a Merry Christmas. Your friend sincerely, Carl. Wasn't that nice?
Mm-hmm. I do, Colonel McCaslin. I work with him at the 45th Museum.
That's right. Well, Hickey and I helped him and he helped me. I hear you probably have this story on Turner laying in state, whatever it is. And
I was going to ask, why the turnpike?
Why you built it?
Yeah.
That's a good question. It's a matter of the Chamber of Commerce of Tulsa and Oklahoma City wanted a direct route. I'd say offhand, off the top of my head. And all right, now here, more you can get all that later. Here about Jessica Turner, her service is set. Jessica was a very quiet little lady, never been a lady. And I didn't realize that she was just a couple of years younger than I. She really turned out. And can you make this off the record?
Sure. I mean, again.
Yeah, I just didn't want to mention that word because it's not generally known. Now all these, Bill and Joe, are letters from prominent people and governors in the state that you can just put in his general file.
Good.
That just kind of clutters it up.
Did you relate on tape about how you met your second wife?
No, and I want to tell about that hippies at Stillwater. Am I taking all your time?
No.
All right. I was in charge of personnel, as I told you, the governor's office. Mr. McNeil was advisor, and he needed a secretary. He'd come to me if they wanted something. And he'd worked out with Clarence DeWeese, who was head of the educational department downstairs where they do all the work. Secretaries are and the like. And Max says, Forrest, there's a young lady down there in that office, secretary, whom we want to employ. But he said, I do not want to make the decision until you go and make a judgment. So I go down there, it's on the first floor on that way. I go in and have to walk by a lot of personnel, and then I look this lady over over there, fine-looking young lady to me. And some of them buddy told her, Hazel, and she looked all right to me. Hazel told me later after I left, this girl said, don't you know who that is? No, because that's Forest McIntire, the most eligible single man out here. But anyhow, later, I told Mr. McNeil, and Hazel said, yeah, I came down there and judged me like judging cows. Just looked me over and didn't say anything to me, and just looked and turned around and walked back. Just and then it was 2 years before we married. You know, she was Mr. McNeil's secretary, and I didn't pay much attention to her. Attractive woman. And then there, Turner, a bunch of them, and we'd gone several days up to Washington. I was running the office, and we'd go in the blue room there and play bridge in dull hours, summertime. And got acquainted with her, and I took her to the show, but it had to be sub rosa because you couldn't be going with the same girl in the governor's office, you know. So I went with her a while, and anyhow, I went out to Las Vegas one time. I was a friend of mine, Dr. Bennett. I sent her a postcard, which I very seldom, and she sent that, and her sister called her on the phone when the card came and said, "Did you know that Forest McIntire sent you a postcard?" She said, "No, he never does anything like that." Well, anyhow, I went to another, and I finally, we went up at the Beacon Club one night and a dance, and she says, "Do you remember proposing to me on the dance floor?" Next morning she asked me to call me. I said, "Sure, I remember. I meant every word of it." And she said, "Well, I just thought you drinking and forgot it." I says, "No, I didn't forget it." And I tell you what, dear child, she didn't trust me because she said, "Now, we're going to get married by the 28th of June or we're not going to get married." I gave her 3 days back. Now, that's that story you wanted. Now they have them going back to Board of Regents in the 60s when we had so much trouble with the hippies and the marchers in Stillwater. One of them I was telling Bill about the national press and was giving a play up for the hippies. And the cowboys, we had a whole barracks, dormitory full of cowboys, head coats. And I mean, they were rough cowboys. They drove pickups and wore boots. And they came marching down the street and they were going to have a big fight with the hippies. They rode by the lot adjacent to the east side of the old gym. And everybody expected a big confrontation. When these cowboys came down the street marching, boy, they looked like Cox's army. The hippies all disappeared. They just all scattered. That settled that. But back to the board meeting. They would come in with the old British backpacks. You see them over your shoulder, stuff in their bag, and long hair and everything. And they'd want to break up our meeting, and we wouldn't let them. We'd decide we just were not going to make national news, and we'd kick them out. But I was the boy responsible for order and decorum in board meetings. I had 2 plain clothesmen standing out there in that hall if I ever needed them. I never did. Nobody knew it. 1 or 2 board members knew it. Never had to use it. We had a little table over here, a coffee bar where we'd get coffee and cookies. The board member would get up and get coffee and cookies. Well, they'd come in there and tack that, and they'd clean that table all off and everything. Then they'd come around, march around, and we had this big conference table, and they would lie or sit on the floor right by your chair. So if you got up, they were hoping you'd stomp on it. Well, I was very careful. But we had a plan, and we'd get something real thick and dull. Every 2 years we had to make a property inventory for all these colleges. It was about 2 inches, 3 inches thick. So the chairman of the board would start reading that. Now if you can find anything duller than that, I don't know. And we just outsweated them. But we had put us out, but we never made the headline. They finally got tired of us. That actually happened. And one day they were marching out about in front of Student Union building. The board meeting broke up, we opened the window and all got out on the roof to watch them. Now that's history no one else knows. Well, here's that letter I was going to give you on Lucy Hodgson.
I'd like to get a story about you in Africa, too. About almost being arrested.
Oh, that's something. That's classic. Well, in 1974, I think it was, my brother is a very controversial preacher, known throughout Oakland, throughout the United States and the world, as a very strict fundamentalist Bible believer, head of the International Council of Christian Churches. He was having a meeting in Nairobi, Kenya. There were about 5,000 people there, big, in the new Kenyatta Auditorium. And Kenyatta was the Prime Minister or head of Kenya. Well, Carl had invited this famous Russian defector named Soloniski. You'll have to learn how to pronounce that. This made Kenyatta mad because he was courting Russia at the time. He knew the Russians wouldn't like it. So unbeknown to Carl, one morning at breakfast at his hotel, the police of Kenya came in and literally kidnapped him and took him away from the table and did not let him even say goodbye to his wife or children. They just took him to the airport, bought the ticket. They didn't even let Carl use his own ticket that he had in his billfold. He didn't get to go back to the room to get his billfold. And took him out to the airport and put him on a plane. We didn't know where he was other than he was gone. And Hazel and I had been on a 3-day safari up at the Serengeti and the Amboseli Park and Kilaguni just to see the wild animals, and we saw all of them. And we'd just returned home at the hotel, and we stayed at the Hilton Hotel. Carl and Netta always stayed away from Carl, so Hazel and I had to have a little more privacy and could do what we wanted to do, since he was a preacher. Well, this next morning, I heard a tap on the door, and I think I went to answer. But anyhow, the door was cracked, and 4 men pushed their way into my bedroom in the Hilton Hotel. I was barely dressed. Hazel had to put on a robe to be decent. And they came in and said I was under arrest. Under arrest. McIntire, you're under arrest. Well, finally, one of them mentioned Reverend McIntire or Dr. McIntire. Then I had a clue. I said, hell, I'm not Dr. McIntire. They could tell I wasn't a preacher. I said, I'm his brother, and I'm a colonel in the United States Army, retired. But it shocked them so because they didn't want any confrontation with the United States. Because I did have the credentials. I presented the card, and they looked at it. ID card. Well, I knew I had them on top then, and I was mad, and I cussed them all the way out of my room to the elevator in the hall, and so you'll know how much I really said. General Patton, in my speech, Patton looked sick. And then, about that time, the phone rang, and they called that they'd taken Carl, and Carl's wife or his son-in-law called me, and I was disturbed, and Hazel I was too, and I just didn't know what was going to happen. Playing ball way more. So I told Hazel just stay in the room, I'd go. So I rushed over to the embassy. It was in a building on the 2nd floor. And I got the elevator. It opened up into a great big room with a lot of secretaries like. And the minute I opened that elevator door, I'd raise my voice, and those secretaries started scattering. They just couldn't get out of my way.
At the American Embassy?
At the American Embassy. And I asked for the ambassador. I knew he was in Washington, but the next man came. He was a fine young man. He said, Colonel McIntire, come right in. Took me in the drawing room, great big table. I'd have been afraid and scared of it, but I'd had experience from big tables with the Board of Regents, and it didn't scare me. And this young man started asking me what happened. And I told him about bursting in my room and talking the way I did, and he looked at me and he says, Colonel, you're lucky to be alive. I said, what do you mean? He says, no one talks to these people like you do. They're Oxford trained. They're government sponsored. He said recently they took one of their ministers out in the jungle trail and he disappeared. That was in the paper. He said, now I said, I want to call Carl Albert. You mean Speaker of the House? Yes, Speaker of the House. So I know him personally, as you can see. And in an hour, 6 or 8 hours difference, and I had a night there, and I had to wait to finally get his office. And he had to go, and I went through the White House switchboard, and I got Charlie Ward, top assistant to Carl Albert, and he won't know where I was, and I told him I was way over in Kenya. And told him to get over Tom Steed. Tom and I were together in India, and do what they could. I said, I don't think you'd do much. But anyhow, this guard, this person stayed with Hazel and me the rest of the day. I went back to my hotel to get my wife Hazel, and I took her to the big dining room to eat lunch. And the British broadcast, BBC, came to interview me, and they found out who I was, and the representative from the Los Angeles Times, and I was courteous, gave him an interview. But I told them I didn't want them to print this till I got out of the country, and I was going to leave tonight. And my left got off about midnight. And just before I left, this young man with me from the embassy, who had been in contact with the embassy time to time, said, "Mr. Colonel McIntire, what on earth did you do in Washington?" I said, "Well, I just called a few friends." He said, "We've had more telegrams and calls over this incident than anything that's happened around here." So anyhow, we finally heard about Carl, and he didn't have any money, we learned. He borrowed $100 from a passenger, which he later paid. He had friends in Amsterdam, and he went there. He still had, they paid the ticket for him to New York. The government did. I don't know whether he ever got a refund on his or not. Anyhow, he got home, and I got to New York, and his wife was there in tears and said, "Carl, we don't know where he is." And wanted me to use influence to go to Washington. I said, "Well, this is Saturday. I can't go to Washington on Saturday afternoon. I want to go home. I'll call." So I got the airlines to get me 2 days early out of there. First trip plane to Fort Worth, closest to Oklahoma City. Got in there at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, slept on the van in the VIP lounge. Was home, caught the 6 o'clock plane, got home around 7 or something. And when I walked in the house, he called that Carl had been found coming around his own house trying to get in, trying to break in.
Where did he live at that time?
Lived in Collingswood, New Jersey. He had a church there. He'd been pastor for 50 years of the Bible Presbyterian Church in Collingswood, New Jersey. At one time, he had over 600 radio stations over this country. Had several in Oklahoma, but that's through the years, you know. And that's all. Then we had trouble in Baghdad, I told you about. So every time we go to where we've had it, I think I've got the whammy put on me. Well, gentlemen, I've enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah.
Very,
Any
very
questions? Okay. Sir, thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure to meet you two, and I'll be in touch with you